Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. We're back. Hope you've enjoyed your week, and things are going to take. We're going to take this up a level now because we're kicking into second gear here because we've already sort of covered the Allsvenskan for the last few weeks, and as you know, anyone who follows us on this podcast, if you're new to it, we don't just cover one league on this show. We cover two leagues in extensive detail. So it's time. It's Eliteserien time. It's Norway. The season in Norway, long awaited. It starts this week. And finally, we're going to have some action in the Norwegian League, the Eliteserien. So it's going to be a very exciting week ahead. And this episode is going to be a season preview in which we bring you coverage of every team, our predictions, a sort of table. We're going to predict every single team in the table and their final position and bring our 10 to watch. So hope you're ready, Mr. Steve Wyss, Meatman Soccer, our Norwegian expert, because today is your day. How are you today, Steve?
Hey, I'm Jonathan. I'm all right, thank you very much. I'm really excited. This date has kind of cropped up on us a bit, really. 10th of May. That's the first match. So it's going to be very exciting. Obviously, it's about a month later than normal, but it's here now, and there's a bit of, as I'm going to talk about soon, there's a bit of sort of confusion with the fixture lists and a few quirks certainly in the first few rounds regarding that. But yeah, Eliteserien is back for another 30 games in the year 2021, and I can't wait.
Yeah, can't wait indeed. It's going to be a very interesting season, certainly. There's been a lot of changes, a lot to talk about, I think, as you said, a lot of delays and things like that. I believe, Steve, the last time we really talked about Eliteserien in detail was all the way back in December for our Christmas special podcast. So we have touched on, obviously, Molde and a few other teams this year in 2021 on the pod, in some detail. Obviously, Molde's European run, getting to the latter stages of the Europa League, had a really great run. But really, Steve, we haven't really talked about Norway in a good sort of 4 or 5 months now. So have you missed it? And what are the sort of headline changes that maybe we're looking at this moment in time? You mentioned the restrictions, for example. Firstly, though, have you missed the old league? Are you ready for it?
I've missed it, yeah. But I've enjoyed actually looking into a lot of the Allsvenskan stuff. As I said about a month or so ago, it was a really good chance for me to get more into Sweden, and I've watched a fair few games, so I've enjoyed my time. I feel way more briefed in on the Swedish league than I used to be, and it's given me another month to prepare. But of course, I've missed the league, and by this stage, we'd normally be probably 5 or 6 games in. So one of the reasons it has been delayed is because there's very strict regulations in Norway over coronavirus and everything like that. There's been a number of teams. There's a reason why there's only 5 matches in the first 2 rounds. It's because there's been certain teams that weren't allowed to get back into training and things along those sort of lines, and at a later date compared to some other clubs. So it's not until round 3 we see the full complement of teams actually in action. There's quite a few midweek fixtures in the opening few rounds, but similar to last season. Actually, do you remember when the Eliteserien started in June last year? It was really gung-ho for quite a while. And I think, I think the first half of the year, half of the season, the first 14, 15 rounds, it's going to be batshit mental, to be honest. And I think only sort of after, the middle of the mid to late summer, we're going to get more into a normal sort of routine. So, it's going to be, as I say, similar to 2020, I think, in terms of the first half of the season. It's going to come at us really hard, really fast, and I've got to be on my toes.
You've got to be on your toes as ever on this show, because I'm going to put you to the test in this next hour or so. We're going to delve into every single team, and I'm quite excited about it. I'm quite looking forward to it. I can take a back seat on this one. If you've not listened to our Allsvenskan season preview, then dig back about a month or so now, and you're welcome to listen to that as well. Full preview of every single team in Sweden. So. The league is obviously up and running now, but still, if you want to get briefed on it, if you want to know more about the team in Sweden, then feel free. The Norwegian Football Federation, as you mentioned, Steve, has been quite sort of, there's been a lot of changes, hasn't there, in terms of dates and things like that. There was an announcement in April that due to the delayed start to Eliteserien, The transfer window was also postponed, I believe. It was postponed from April 29th to 12th of May. It was originally April 17th to April 30th, I believe. There was a sort of a middle transfer window, according to the Norwegian Football Federation's website. And it seems like you say, there's been very sort of no tolerance for COVID, really, which I suppose is quite an understandable stance and quite a welcome stance to a certain extent. But I know there's been some frustrations in Norway. Some people we follow on in the region have been a bit frustrated, maybe not being able to get involved. Steve, I wanted to just let's begin this show with a wider overview of Norway, because you mentioned you've been watching quite a lot of Sweden. You've had a chance to sort of dig into this league, and Allsvenskan has been very exciting, hasn't it? And we've had quite a good few shows on Allsvenskan in the last few weeks, and I've quite enjoyed the content, and hopefully you as a listener, if you're listening, have enjoyed what we're putting out. How would you compare, for those who maybe are new to the show in 2021, let's say, if you've just sort of started listening to Allsvenskan coverage, and now you're thinking about the Eliteserien coverage, how would you compare Norway to Sweden in terms of what you've seen, in terms of the quality of the league? Is there anything different in the league to look out for? What's your comparisons from that point of view? And also, what attracted you to this league in the first place? Because we've both got backgrounds in our respective leagues. For those who don't know, give us an overview of your background in this league.
Gosh, yes, I've been following the Norwegian league for a good 15 years now, really. It was just one of those where I initially was looking for a summer league to focus on, really, and it kind of stood out. I follow all of the Scandinavian leagues, really, and this is just the one that I always sort of preferred to watch, and I performed better at in terms of match betting and things like that. And we always have this kind of debate, don't we? What's the better league, Sweden or Norway? There's ultimately not a lot between them, and I think it kind of rotates year on year. The big difference is, obviously, when crowds are back, there are bigger stadiums in Sweden and that, and it's nothing quite like the Stockholm derbies and stuff. I don't think Norway can really compete in that sort of way, although it's certainly not less passionate. I think the Norwegian league's a little bit more, it's a throwback to old times. Those of you who like watching sort of 1990s Premier League, late 90s, it reminds me a lot of that. It's a very physical league. You can get away with sometimes challenges going in Norway, and I'm like, bloody hell, he's off here. Or at very least it's a yellow card, and sometimes the referee doesn't even give anything. And, it's quite an honest league, I always think. Despite there are foreigners in the division, I don't think you see as much diving and stuff compared to a lot of other leagues. I'm not saying Sweden's like that, but I feel like Norway sometimes a little bit less technical than Sweden, more physical. But it's certainly not any less in terms of quality. Look at Molde, they've had a great run in the Europa League, things like that. So I don't think there's a lot to choose between the two leagues really these days. I think they're both actually in a fairly healthy state.
Yeah, good overview there. Thanks for that. And it's good to get your background as well and your experience in the league. I mean, what you just said there kind of is backed up by the evidence according to UEFA. Norway is the 22nd best league in Europe, according to UEFA's 2020-2021 coefficients. And Sweden's just right below it in 23rd. So they're, partners in neighbouring countries and neighbouringly ranked. So, Sweden is 0.5 coefficient points behind Norway. So, Molde will have done a lot of work in increasing that. In fact, they gained 4 points. So they've leapfrogged them because of that run from Molde. Let's see what Malmo can do and other teams in Europe can do in Sweden to maybe leapfrog Norway for next season. But they're both, as I say, 22nd and 23rd in Europe. So you're right. They're very, very similar in terms of probably overall quality and performance in Europe, certainly. And I suppose if you're saying what's the best league in Scandinavia, the answer is quite clearly Denmark, who are currently 14th in UEFA's coefficients. So that's the overview. That's the background of Steve. That's the situation in Norway. Now let us begin our season previews because, it's going to be a really exciting season. Steve, we're going to do it in the same way that we do every season. We're going to sort of predict the league. I think we're going to start with your predicted champions. Before we do that, I'm just going to run through the table from last year for those who may not be aware. So top 6 last year was Bodø Glimt champions. First time in their history, only lost one game in 30, 103 goals scored. A quite incredible season that will probably go down in Norwegian football history. an unbelievable year, as I said, and we talked about it many times last season. Second was Molde, a good sort of nearly 20 points behind Bodø Glimt. Third was Vålerenga. Fourth was Rosenborg. Fifth, Kristiansund, and sixth, Viking. So that was the top six, and I won't go through the mid-table teams because you're going to predict these yourself. But other teams of note, Mjøndalen survived the relegation playoffs and stayed in the league. Start and Arlesund were relegated, and so we've got two new teams in the league this season, which you're going to tell us about. But Steve, it's a 16-team league, but only one team can win it. So let's begin with your overview of the champions and where you think they will finish, and they are Bodø Glimt.
Yeah, we always kick off, don't we, with the defending champions. And as it happens, I actually think they're going to go back to back, and I think they're going to regain their crown. So that they are my prediction for the gold medal. And what a sensational season they had. Like you said, 26 wins out of 30, one loss, 103 goals, 81 points. That's never going to be repeated again, I don't think. I don't think we'll ever see that again. If they improve on that, Jonathan, I'll eat vegan for a week or something. You know, it's just not going to happen. Simple as that. It's just some people keep asking me, like, you know, have they done a Leicester City? You know, like a once in a lifetime thing. It's never going to happen again. And the thing is, it's different in Norway. You know, that's a 19-point gap they had on Molde. I think the question is they are going to drop down below that mark. It's a question of how far down. But ultimately, they're not just going to go from first to like mid-table. That just doesn't happen. If you look at the stats from last year, you know, they were at the best in terms of expected goals against, expected points. Although one thing I'll say about the expected points, this is according to Y-Scout stats, their expected points was 64, and they overachieved that by 17. So, you know, they got the most out of last year. It's, you know, when you look at the actual squad itself, you know, those who are sort of negative on Glimt this year will point out that they lost Philip Zinkernagel, Kasper Juncker, who scored a shed load of goals between them and assists. Jens Petter Hauge, of course, was lost in early autumn as well. Although, you know, they did without him for the last 10 games and they still look pretty damn good. So, you know, how do you replace those two really key players? Well, I think you got to look within the squad at youngsters that, you know, showed signs of breaking through last year, like Ola Stolbakken, Sebastian Tonektis, Andre Fett, guys like that. It's very interesting, but, you know, the striker, probably replacing Kasper Juncker is the big problem. They've got Erik Botheim in, ex-Rosenborg youngster, played a bit at Stabaek last year. He's never quite achieved his potential fully, so I think there's quite a lot on his shoulders. But when you look at the rest of the squad, the midfield pretty much stays all the same. The defence is completely intact, and the goalkeeping situation. So, I think they've got plenty of weapons still. We know they've got a great coaching system, fantastic manager. They know how they play physically. They're probably going to be the best condition of everyone. They're going to cope with them first 15 rounds better than most. And 81 points. I think they'll drop down to maybe sort of mid to late 60s. Maybe touch 70 points. But that'd probably be enough to win the gold medal, I think.
Well, you've heard it here first. If Bodø Glimt can top or match their points total from last season, Meat Man Soccer, the most staunch meat eater I've ever known in my life, has said he will eat vegan for a week. And we've had one or two bets in the past, Steve, and I know you're a man of your word. So I'm quite. Bodø Glimt has suddenly gained a new fan here just in 15 minutes. So I will quite enjoy watching you tuck into a corn burger. So yes, an unbeaten season from Glimt will be very satisfying just for me personally. And let's see where they go with that. So very, very brave of you there. Just looking at some of the sort of fixtures they've had, they've played quite a lot of preseason games, haven't they? They've been to Marbella. You know, they've been pretty active, haven't they? They've had a few games recently, drew with Molde. Teams have been quite sort of playing each other, haven't they, in preseason? I guess that's partly due to restrictions, is it? But what trends have you noticed, or what's caught your eye in terms of Glimt, and especially with transfers? Is there anyone you really, you know, you mentioned a couple of names there just now, but is there anyone that you really think will stand their mark on this league that didn't last season? Or conversely, is there anyone that you feel did really, really well last season and, you know, may have a slight dip?
Yeah, I think the two guys that really interest me are Axel Lindahl. They signed from Degerford. Had a very good season last year in Super N. And I think in pre-season he's been doing all right. I think they'll use him more as a bench option. He's 26 years old, so he's no spring chicken, but at the same time he's sort of in that prime age. I think he can fit in nicely. Sondre Surly from Kristiansund, another very versatile player. These two guys can play anywhere in midfield and attack, probably even parts of defence as well if needed. So I like the look of them two signings. They've got an intriguing Brazilian on loan from Ukrainian club PFK Lviv. Pernambuco is called. I know really nothing about him. I don't think he's got a work permit yet, but he could be an intriguing winger out wide. But like I said before, I think you look at the midfield engine they've got in that team: Ulrik Saltnes, Patrick Berg, Vegard Moberg, Morten Konradsen. That is a hell of an engine in the middle there. Hugo Vettelsen. They're so strong centrally. And then, guys like Solbach and Tunetti out wide, Sondre Fett as well. I think striker is a question mark if Erik Botheim, can he fill the boots of Kasper Junker? But he's going to get so many chances, he probably is going to put quite a few away. I think probably striker is a question mark. Victor Boniface, maybe. He could do that. The defence stays exactly the same. They've brought a couple of youngsters in from the prospects, you could say, from the Obos Ligaen. Vegard Kongsgaard, Sigurd Kvia. I don't think they're going to get that many minutes, but that's sort of the next conveyor belt system. They've sent one of their best prospects, Isaac Amundsen, on loan to Tromsø of all teams, which is an interesting one. Goalkeeper probably as well is a little bit slight question mark. I don't really know who the number one is here. I mean, Nikita Kaikin did all right last year. Joshua Smits, they'll battle it out. They don't really have an elite goalkeeper. That's probably a slight weak spot for them. But, I mean, I don't think the goalkeepers are going to be tested that much either. So, yeah, just a really strong engine in the midfield is the big strength of Bodø Glimt this year, I think.
Tell us about Kasper Junker, because he was one of the top players in the league this season. There's been quite a few names have gone, haven't there, of that famous team. Jens Petter Hauge being one. Of course, I know he left towards the end of last season, went to AC Milan. He's doing, okay there. He's, featured in quite a few games in Europe as well as Serie A. But there was quite a big story around Kasper Junker, wasn't there? And tell us about that, because it seemed to get quite messy.
He always wanted out of the club. That was quite clear right from the back end, of last season. But I don't think Glimt really wanted rid of him because they'd already lost a couple of star studs. Zinkernagel, they lost him for nothing to Watford, obviously. Junker, I think they wanted to keep him for another year, really, ideally. But in the end, he moved to a Japanese club. So I think he was basically trying to force his way out. He got a little bit messy. And he got his wish in the end. And I think ultimately, why keep an unhappy player, even though I think he still would have done quite well. But 27 goals, that's a lot of goals to replace. I feel like they can, you look at Zinkernagel, 19 goals, 20 assists in the league. I mean, that's monstrous numbers. I feel like Zinkernagel's goals can maybe be replaced sort of as a whole, as a collective sum from quite a lot of players chipping in. But 27 goals from a striker is a lot. And I think it puts a lot on Erik Botheim's pressure on him, really. He's a 21-year-old youngster. Always shown great potential, but never fully delivered. He's going to get great service and everything now. But Junker was a three-dimensional striker. He was, good technically, great movement. He was physical as well. He could get you in the air. And I think Botheim is not as good, really, to be honest. So I think that's the big concern. But, even if Botheim only does half as well, it's still a success probably for Glimt, isn't it? That's the thing. But, we're talking about a player that was, his numbers were off the charts.
Yeah, he said after leaving as well, he said, I've always wanted to play in Asia. So, it's quite a big move for him, really, to sort of get a big move to Urawa Red Diamonds. He said Japan is a very special country with a high level of football. So good luck to Kasper Junker, because he really did light up the league last season, didn't he? And he said, my job is to find space in the box and put in goals, which he did. I have a very good left foot, and I'm looking forward to playing with other players to make an assist. So, it did get a bit controversial, didn't it? I think, from what I understand, quite a few Glimt fans in the end seemed fairly happy with him leaving. So it seems like it got a bit messy there. But you're predicting them in first place. In summary, how would you sort of sum it up, Steve? Do you think they'll win it easily? Do you think they'll walk it? Do you think it will be, you mentioned they'll get lower points, but do you think it will still be fairly comfortable? Or do you think it will be a bit of a slog for them with their new players, blending them in and everything like that?
Yeah, let's just forget about individual players for now. As an actual collective team, they're probably going to be the best. We know they're so well drilled, so well coached in terms of both tactically, technically, and physically. We know the players are always in tip-top condition. They had an edge last year due to COVID times. I think they're going to have a similar sort of edge this year. They're just trained so well. They've got the stamina, intensity, stuff like that. They're going to be well suited to the first sort of 10, 15 rounds where the fixtures might pile up. And they're probably going to be suited to when they're in Europe as well later in the summer. I don't think it's always a challenge, to be fair, for travelling abroad and stuff. But I think they certainly have an edge on the other teams like that. They've got such a drive and willingness to go, and they're relentless. They keep going at you. They'll rack up the score in the matches they're on top on, and they're so strong at home. They were 100% record at home last year, and they very, very rarely look like not winning in front of their fans there at in Glimt. So just all things adding up, perhaps they don't have as much individual quality on paper compared to last year. But, when all things come together, do I think they'll win it easily? I don't think it will be as easy. It's a question of who can come from the pack and really challenge them consistently. And there'll be one of the three teams that I mentioned soon that probably will get their act together. It's just a question of who. And it might become a close race. But I think I could see them winning it by about sort of 5 to 6 points this year. That's my prediction.
So a lot closer title race then, and should be an interesting one. So you've got Bodø Glimt to win the title, and we'll see how they get on. If you've not listened to the podcast before and you want to listen to Bodø Glimt Sporting Director Asmund Bjorkan dig back into our archives about a year ago. Well, it was maybe good year and a half. Maybe we had him on the podcast, so you can always dig back into that if you want to listen to sort of an exclusive insight from Bodø Glimt. And as the season goes on, we may well sort of have one or two more special guests from the area. So keep an eye out on that. Let's move on to your predicted second place team, and one that might surprise a few people.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I can't really. I'm really 50-50 between a couple of sides for second place, and I'm torn between Vålerenga and Molde. And ultimately, I've decided to go with Vålerenga in second place, which might be a slight reach because Molde could easily put egg on my face here and not just finish second, but actually win the league because Molde are very strong. But I just think Vålerenga, remember 55 points last year, they were third place side. I feel like they've actually signed a couple of good players. More importantly, they've kept all their main guys. And I feel like they're a bit more hungry, perhaps, and they've got a bit more sort of dynamism and sort of X factor with certain players, which can help them. And I actually think they're slightly better defensively than Molde as well, and maybe even slightly better organised tactically. So Vålerenga, for me, I'm going to put it in second place this year. We've got a good blend of players there. The manager, Dogalai Fagermo, it was his first season into 2020 at the helm of the club, and he did pretty well. I've always said I'd love to see this manager win the league because I think now he's at a big club where he's got the resources. He had a very solid first season. He can build on that. I looked at some of the stats from last year. They were perhaps a little bit lucky in terms of XG against. They overachieved in that, slightly overachieving the points and in goals as well. But 10 draws they had out of 30 games. They've got to think that number is going to be reduced. And even if they sort of lose a few of them, if they convert some of them draws into wins, that's going to get them above the 60-point mark. And if you get over the 60-point mark, you've got a chance of gold medals. So it doesn't take an awful lot more to get them into the title race, in my opinion, John.
Give us the positives for Vålerenga fans this season. I know the pronunciation of their name is also a little bit tricky, so if I've botched their name, then I do apologise to any Norwegians listening. But yes, give us the reasons that you're so optimistic about Vålerenga. What is it that stands out for you? What have they done in the transfer market so far this past winter?
I think Vålerenga have got a very good mix of youth and experience in the team. I always like that. They've got some cracking young talent coming through, and they've got some sort of older heads they know what they're doing, But the big positives of this team, I've mentioned the defence. It's quite, I wouldn't say it's an elite defence, but it's a really solid defence tactically. They've got a good goalkeeper as well, Christopher Claassen. I'll talk about him soon. But really the thing that stands out for me is the offence. I think there's a lot of goals in this team and creativity, Jonathan. They've got a really good striker up front, Vidar Kjartansson. I mean, you know about him. He knows where the back of the net is. He's a three-dimensional sort of striker. I would probably consider him more sort of target man. Maybe he lacks a little bit of pace these days. He's getting on a little bit, 31-year-old. But he's he's kind of like this mixture of a poacher target man, but he's no slouch either. If they keep him fit, he'll get quite a lot of goals. They've got fantastic technical players like Aaron Dunham. I think Aaron Dunham could have a monstrous year. Really, they've signed Amor Layouni from the Egyptian side Pyramids. Now, Layouni was at Bodø Glimt not so long ago, and he was tearing up the league up there on the wings. I think he could do the same there. They've got Osame Sahori, who's a great young prospect in midfield, showed a lot of great things last year. They've actually got a couple of youngsters as well, like Sakarius Opsal, who's come back from Tromsø, and they've got a striker up front, CD Jatta, an 18-year-old speedster up front. They've got sort of options, really. They signed a guy, Henrik Udal, from Obos Liga inside Asane. He scored 19 goals last season. It's pretty good going. I feel like they've got all the options covered. Perhaps in midfield, maybe a little bit, maybe they're lacking a real sort of star man in midfield. I mean, you'd say Fredrik Oldrup Jensen's pretty good. Tobias Christiansen's a young signing from Molde. I think they can probably get more out of him at Vålerenga than Molde. If you have to put a slight weak spot, it would be maybe central midfield, but I'm maybe being harsh there. And the Christians have not lost anyone. I like that. Like they haven't lost really any key pieces. They've got rid of some players, but I wouldn't say they were like crucial to the system. So I like the continuity of the club.
Yeah, and they've also got, I noticed looking at this, where they've got Henrik Bjordal, who was at IFK Göteborg in Sweden, and was there when I was out there and watched him quite a few times. Didn't play too much in Allsvenskan in the end. Played about 14 games, I think 3 assists. But he's got a very good record in Eliteserien. He came from Brighton, didn't he? He was on loan at the time, and I think his track record in Eliteserien is 68 games, 15 assists, 4 goals, which is a pretty good track record. So I know he spent sort of half of last season, didn't he, at Vålerenga? But his first full season should be an interesting one. And a player that I've heard big things about, Steve, is Odin Thiago Holm as well, and an 18-year-old. So. You know me, I like my young talents, so he's one I'll be keeping an eye on. And Sarawi as well. Tell us a little bit briefly about Sarawi, because I've heard a lot of good things about him.
Yeah, he's he's a small guy. He's a really good technical player. He can play sort of anywhere, attacking midfield, centre mid, left wing, left mid. Sort of slight left-hand side. He's a great dribbler of the ball. He's got great balance. He's worked on his game to improve his finishing. I think that's probably the point that lets him down, but I've noticed an improvement in that. I expect a few more goals out of him this season. I certainly expect plenty of assists. He's agile. He's got tricks up his sleeve. He can cause defenders all sorts of trouble. And the thing is, the opposition can't just focus on him either, because Vålerenga have got a lot of very good technically good players. And you mentioned the youngster Odin Thiago Holm. I think he actually starts the season injured, but it feels like for literally every position, Vålerenga, they've got like a young backup, up-and-coming prospect in every spot, and I really like that, and these guys will be needed at times for minutes, that's for sure. And the club feels like it's in a really good place. If they don't, win a title this year, I could certainly see them winning the title sort of in the next 3 seasons if they sort of keep the core of this team. But yeah, I just want to mention a couple of key players in defence that defence can get overlooked at Vålerenga. Christopher Klaassen, for me, may well be, he's certainly in the top 3 or 4 goalkeepers in the league. And last year he seemed to get better as it went on. He's only 20-year-old, so he's very young in goalkeeper terms, but he's an absolute star in the making. And he really impresses me. I do like my goalkeepers. It's not the greatest league for goalkeepers this year, sadly, on paper, but Klaassen is one of the best out there. And at right back, Christian Bokrovink. He last year started to really develop into a heck of a talent, both offensively and defensively, especially going forward, put some great crosses in. I think they've got a really good player out there in that spot. So Vålerenga, they seem to have most bases covered, really. It's just, the mentality's improved at the club. They used to be sort of this soft underbelly under Ronny Deila, but the new manager, Dagala Fadugba, has instilled a lot more discipline, a lot more sort of fight in them, and they're no pushovers anymore. And if things sort of align for them, then they've got to improve their away record a little bit, and then they could be a contender.
Very interesting stuff. And briefly, before we wrap up on Vålerenga, is Fadugba man to win a title?
Yeah, definitely. He wants. Look, mate. At the end of the season, if even it's dead rubbers, he wants to win games. He's obsessed about winning, and he wants it so much. And I really like that mentality about. I mean, it can be really frustrating, can't it, facing teams like that? Like he'll rack up the score. He doesn't have any sympathy for teams in that way. He's well up for the fight, and if you can just get in the position, sort of with 5 games to go, they're in the race. He'll give it absolutely everything. Absolutely, he is the man.
Yeah, I like that as well. I saw Roy Keane, funnily enough, just sidetracked for a little bit, but I just saw Roy Keane talking about Newcastle the other day when they played Arsenal, and he was sort of questioning the mentality of the players. And you do tend to get a lot of clubs, don't you, and teams where as soon as they've achieved their objective for a season, winning doesn't really matter anymore to them, does it? It seems
exactly.
And, that really frustrates me, and I could empathise with Keane on that. So it's good to hear of winners and people who want to win and do well and be successful, because sometimes you feel like certain clubs just go through the motions, don't they? And once they achieve their goal, that's it. They switch off. Especially towards the end of seasons, you get players just kind of, you get teams just kind of switching off completely, don't you? And go on bad runs and stuff once they're safe or whatever. So good to hear that. But let's move on. And in third place, obviously, you've already kind of given it away there, but you've got Molde.
Yeah, and this might be too low for them. You know, if they would go and win the league, then I wouldn't be at all surprised, because that's probably on paper. If you look at individual quality and probably depth as well, they may well have the best team, even better than Bodø Glimt. They've got some really good players in here, but I think Molde have shown a few weaknesses in the last sort of year to 18 months, especially defensively. I just don't always feel they can be relied upon. Andreas Linder is probably now the best goalkeeper in the league. And he came up big for them last season. He's great against penalties. We saw in the Europa League, he was a big reason why they progressed so far. But if he doesn't sort of, have such a good season, then I think that defence is going to be exposed a little bit. They've still got a big problem for me at right back. And this started last year where Christopher Haraldside was out for the whole year with a cruciate ligament. He's injured again, sadly. I'm not sure how long for, but for me, Haraldside was a big reason, one of the main reasons why he won the league. He's a great prospect there at right back. Knows what he's doing. They're still going with the youngster Marcus Holgren Pettersson, I think, in that position, or sort of a rotation of other people. I think it's a soft spot. I actually think they're fullbacks in their tactical system, 4-2-3-1 mostly. They leave themselves a bit too exposed, and we do know they've got some good defenders like Gregus and Bjørnbakk and that, but they're not always the most reliable in terms of injuries. So will this hectic schedule go against Molde, and will they pick up injuries again? And it's the same across the whole squad, actually. They've got sort of guys that need to be wrapped in cotton wool. And that is a concern for me. We know they've got some tremendous offensive firepower. They've got really strong midfielders. I do worry. They've lost Lecky James. And for me, Lecky James was a real top man in this league. Such a high percentage of shots on target for Lecky James. I don't see them. I just don't see anyone. They've not replaced him yet, unless David Datref Fofana comes on. We'll talk more about him later. But just a few question marks from me about Molde. They're certainly well set, but I just got a gut feeling they're not maybe going to quite achieve what some expect them to.
Yes, Lecky James is one of the one to leave, and he's been on our podcast as well. And he was a great guest, wasn't he? I enjoyed that show. He's gone to Saudi Arabia. Our Kidisia. They've also lost Henry Wingo to Hungarian side. They brought in quite a lot of money there. I think it's one of the biggest transfers in terms of incomings for the club. Well, in Eliteserien even. One player that they've sold to Vålerenga is Tobias Christensen. Is he a player who's going to kind of, is he going to do anything? Is that
come back to haunt them? Basically, you're asking. Possibly. I think they could have got more out of Christensen. The problem is, right, Molde have got a lot of players that played in Christensen's position. And you're not going to, as good as you might be, you're not going to dislodge Magnus Wolff-Eikrem out of the starting lineup, are you? Magnus Wolff-Eikrem's the best player in the league. Simple as that. He does have his limitations in terms of the minutes he can play on the field and stuff like that. And he's got injury doubts and stuff. But ultimately, Molde have too many players who want to play Christensen's role. Christensen's basically a number 10. Or maybe a little bit deeper than a 10. And he wasn't getting enough consistent minutes. I could see him coming back to haunt them, definitely, if he gets a good sort of running the team at Vålerenga, to be honest, yeah. But that kind of just shows you how strong they are in the midfield. They can let someone like that go. You know, you look at their midfield, they've got the likes of Fredrik Orsnes, Ecters Hussein, Martin Eriksen, Skjoldstad, and then sort of creative midfield, obviously Michael Wolf-Eichgrim, Eirik Ullen Andersen, Knudsen, guys like that. They're loaded in that spot, Molde. So that's why they could sort of let him go, Jonathan.
Interesting. We'll see how that pans out. It's always an interesting move when players move from one sort of big club to another in any league, isn't it? It's, what are the reasons for, I mean, Molde, when I think of Molde these days, I think of Erling Braut Haaland, and I think of the sort of talent that's come through at Molde in recent seasons. Is there any big talents? You know, I've seen they've signed a few players, Berk Riese from Odd and David Trefafani you mentioned, and Bjorn Sigurdarsson. Within the squad, do they have good youth development? Is it sort of is the pipeline ticking away, or you know, have they got any young talents to look out for? Have they got anything exciting about them this season that fans can get excited about?
Yeah, I mean, David Datred Fofana is a really interesting prospect. I'll reveal it now. He's one of my 10 to watch later, so I'll go into more detail about him. He's only 18-year-old Ivorian who caught the eye in the Europa League, and I think he can certainly go very well. But he's still raw at 18 years old. You know, in terms of other young talents, there's always a decent sort of youngsters coming through, or they buy players young and bring them in. You know, let's not forget Marcus Holmgren Pedersen, sort of right back. He's only 20-year-old. There's an interesting lad who's come back on loan from Raufoss, Emil Breivik, and I think I would like to see him get some minutes this year. But it's so competitive it's so hard for these youngsters to get into the Molde team because there's so many established players that are more sort of mature and age at the prime. That probably Breivik may well go on loan out there somewhere again, actually. But yeah, you know, I feel I'm negative on Molde here, but there's a lot of positives. They've got a lot of real quality players up front. Umai Wamfo, you know, I would expect him to fill his boots this year as usual, although he's not always as clinical as you want him to be. I would always prefer Lecky James over Umai myself. Bjorn Sigurdarsson, I really don't see what he brings to the table. I think he's a pretty poor signing, to be honest with you. I know historically he scored goals, but he maybe looks over the hill now. And you know, there's been rumours that Molde are in the market for another striker. He's been that disappointing. You know, that's the sort of thing that worries me.
Yeah, and you're right in terms of what you say about Molde. You know, let's not get too down on them. I mean, they made it to the Europa League last 16, so that's one hell of an achievement, isn't it? What they did there, getting all the way to playing Granada and nearly, you know, not doing too badly, 3-2 on aggregate. It was you know, a decent effort, wasn't it? So do you think they'll be in shape because of that? You know, they've played quite a few games, obviously knocking out Hoffenheim. Do you think those games that they've played in the recent months will put them in good stead?
I think, well, you've got to think that's nearly 2 months ago now, there. So I don't know whether that's a positive or a negative. There seems to be quite a few injuries floating around the squad at this time, Jonathan. And I think it's just because they've got a lot of players who tend to be injury prone. And that in the first 15 rounds last year, you know, they were up and down in terms of results at times. And I think that could be something to look out for again as the season goes on. They're going to be in European qualifiers and things. And I don't know whether the squad can cope. One thing I will say is they've got the resources to bring guys in, even before the end of this transfer window, certainly in the summer, to bolster things. They've got money, they've got resources in that regard. But I think teams, you know, if teams get at them, I think they can be quite soft defensively. They will concede chances. They were quite unlucky in terms of the expected goals against last year compared to how many they did concede. And if that comes back to bite them this year, if Andreas Linde doesn't have such a good year in between the sticks, which could happen, he might even get injured. He's been injured before. So I feel like the defence, when it's at full strength, is excellent, but there'll be too many moments where they're sort of resting and rotating. They have this system of doing that in the last 18 months to 2 years, and it backfired a bit last year, you know. So I think I could see them dropping silly points at times, but at the same time, they're a banker for the top three, and you know, if things go well, they could certainly easily win the gold medal again. But you know, just a few things that sort of cast doubts in my mind. That's why I'm predicting them third this year. You know, stuck my neck out a little bit here.
Fantastic stuff. And let's move on. But before we do move on to your fourth place choice, I just want you to touch on fantasy, Steve, if you can, because there may be people listening to this and sort of doing their fantasy team, and Eliteserien fantasy is always quite popular, isn't it? So for those who are listening to the podcast maybe and want to start doing a team, they're probably taking some notes on what you've said so far already. Do you want to sort of just reveal a little bit about Eliteserien fantasy before we move on to fourth place and the code and how people can join this season? Because certainly our Allsvenskan fantasy has been quite popular, isn't it, so far?
Yes, now the Eliteserien fantasy is very popular. There's a lot of very, very good accounts out there. I'll probably mention them in the second half of this episode. But you can join our Nordic Football Podcast League. The join code is lowercase EV 70I0. So they're all lowercase, the letters in that, and we'll put the code out on Twitter as well. So if you didn't hear that correctly, then you can certainly copy and paste job sort of thing. In terms of fantasy, I don't have quite as much time as some of there's some really good experts in the Eliteserien fantasy now. I fully respect them. I've been competitive in fantasy the last 2 seasons. I like to think I hold my own. If we just talk about Molde, there's not really anyone particularly in the Molde team that interests me, to be honest. Maybe the goalkeeper Linda. I think the problem is there's a lot of rotation with Molde, Jonathan, and I feel like there's quite a few expensive players in their team that, I'm like Sigurdsson's 10 million, for example. I'm not sure I'd trust him at that sort of price. And with Molde, it's about the consistency of players. You might have a star sort of man, and then he's sort of on the bench or even rested out, and it can get really frustrating, especially if it's like a double game week. So, I'll hopefully post some fantasy thoughts sort of later on in the week. I'm not sure I'll have time, but certainly do join our fantasy league.
Yeah, we can cover some of the players as we go along, but just for those who are listening, if you're doing a team, then get involved, and whilst you're listening to the show, you may want to be looking through the teams and stuff like that. So I don't know the exact website link, but I think it's eliteserien.fantasy, isn't it? Something like that, Steve. And our code again, just to repeat, EV70I0. So fourth place, you've got Rosenborg, which I find quite surprising, to be honest, because they're a massive club in this league, aren't they? I mean, the backstory on them, Steve, tell us a bit about them, because for those who don't know about Rosenborg, you've got them in fourth place. They're a big club. I'm surprised about that, Steve. Tell us your thoughts, and also tell us what this club means and has achieved over the years.
Huge club, biggest up there in Norway. They've won the most amount of league titles. I'm not sure exactly how many it is, but it's significantly more than anyone else. They have fallen on hard times in the last couple of years. It's not been good for them. The Eirik Horneland era did not serve them well. I feel like he was sacked after 3 games last season, and I feel like they were still suffering the hangover throughout the whole campaign. They've got an experienced old dog in Aga Hareide as their manager right now. He's been around the block. He knows kind of what he's doing. I think their recruitment has been not quite as sharp as it could be in recent years. It looks a bit better this winter, in fairness, but I feel like they lack a certain dynamic, sort of this X factor compared to some of the 3 teams I've just mentioned. I think only 1 of 4 teams can win the league this year, and it's Bodø, Glimt, Vålerenga, Molde, or Rosenborg. Only 1 of them 4 can win it. At least if things go right for Rosenborg, they could get the gold medal. Of course they could. But as I'll talk about the squad soon. But I certainly just feel like the other 3 are better right now. I'm just a little bit concerned that they're still sort of regrouping. We're in maybe a transition phase, but I don't always like the way that they're moving forward in terms of the transfer market.
There's always quite a lot of comment on their recruitment, isn't there? I mean, they're a big club, as I say. We've got a lot of followers who followed Rosenborg, particularly in America. I've noticed there's quite a few followers over there, and give a shout out to 1 or 2 of them that have even appeared on this podcast in the past. But has recruitment been an issue for them in the past few years? Because you mentioned they've had a lot of changes to the squad, and they've had some financial issues. Is that correct? But my perspective on massive clubs sort of falling down is it always potentially comes down to recruitment. So where have they been going wrong these past few years? Because they've not won the league for a while now, and to be losing out to teams like Bodø, Glimt. I mean, with all due respect to Bodø, Glimt, that is quite poor, isn't it, for Rosenborg, given the size and the expectations around the club. I mean, nearly 30 points fewer than Bodø, Glimt last season. That's incredible, I think, and more than 50 goals less scored, which is unbelievable in my opinion.
I think they're missing out on some of the top younger talent in domestically. Historically, they used to snap up anyone sort of good up and coming who was just starting to become into that prime age, and they've not done enough of those transfers in recent years. I remember when they signed Adek Benro from Viking. That was a sort of deal that Rosenborg were known for doing back in the day really well. And although he had his injury problems there, he certainly, he took them to the Europa League, beat Ajax thanks to him. That was the sort of deal that Rosenborg just did all day long, and then they kind of took weapons from the rest of the league. I feel like they've been moving for more older players in recent times. That I'm not saying they passed it by any means, but it does concern me about, for example, that Guillermo Molins has come in. This week, I think, or last week. He was at flipping Sarpsborg last year. He didn't look very good. He's 32-year-old sort of journeyman. I just don't see what sort of value he adds. Things like that. The other thing I think they've not done right is there's always used to be like they used to bring their own youngsters through at Rosenborg really well. A talent centre themselves in their own academy. There's not enough of that these days. There's a couple of lads, Emil Konradsen Saida, and maybe Edvard Tagseth as well, and the backup goalkeeper Julian Feierlund. There's not enough of it now for me. They're not been given enough minutes and game time, with the exception of the odd one or two. It's like they've been happy to more bring in these older players just to take the spots. So I think that's where the problems have been in terms of the transfers, Jonathan. I don't think they've necessarily let go the right players either in the last 2 or 3 seasons. That's been the other issue.
Yeah, and you mentioned Guillermo Molins. I mean, if I'm honest, I think he was at Malmo before, and I know he's had quite a good career in fairness to him, but I didn't necessarily think Malmo will miss him too much. Some fans may disagree with me on that, but we'll see how he gets on. I don't necessarily think he's a huge player. I mean, Rosenborg's recruitment has been quite Sweden focused, hasn't it? In recent seasons as well, they've taken quite a few players from Sweden. So I believe their sporting directors, it might be Swedish as well. You might be able to confirm that for me, Steve. But what are the big transfers this summer or this winter? Sorry, or what are the big names to look out for? And why do you think fourth? I mean, why do you think they're going to stagnate? Are they not brought in good enough names?
Yeah, let's bring through some transfers. They brought in Adam Andersson from Häcken, Jonathan Augustinsson from Djurgården. They are fullbacks or wingbacks. I think Augustinsson's starting the season injured. I don't know how long he's out for. They've brought in Vebjorn Hoff, midfielder from Odd. Molins, as we mentioned. Stefano Vecchia from Sirius. And they brought in a striker, a target man, 25-year-old Ole Christian Saiter from Ranheim, just across the city there. Again, he's unfortunately starting the season injured until middle of summer, I think. So the signings I like Vebjorn Hoff. I think he had a great year for Odd last year. He reminds me a little bit to the Christopher Zachariasen signing. Now, Zachariasen was one of the few real shining lights for Rosenborg last year, and Hoff, I think, kind of fits the same sort of build. The Rosenborg are really strong in midfield. I'll give them that. They've got some great players there, like Hoff, Henriksen, Persilian, Skelbred, Zachariasen, Anders Konradsen. I have always liked the youngster Tagset. Although I think Henriksen has been sort of earmarked for filling in sort of in defence sometimes as well. You can't deny they're strong. They are very strong in the middle of the park. That is their big area. I'm not sure the defence is actually going to be that great. They've lost the old dog, Tore Reginiussen, who is not just a good defender, but he was the leader, he was the captain. He was the man that sort of kept them motivated in there. And, I'm not sure about the defence. Hovland, Eliofsson, right hand. There's a lack of depth. So the defence worries me a little bit. Andre Hansen in goal. He hasn't quite been as elite as he once was. But he's still a good goalkeeper for sure. And Feierlund's a great backup. But I'm not sure the defence is all what it's cut out to be. And then up front, we've not even talked about this problem yet. Dino Islamovic, they're banking on him to be the sort of the star striker to lead them to, potentially the gold medal. I just don't see Islamovic being that man. And I still don't, I think that's the issue ultimately, that it feels like they're relying on these target men up front now, Jonathan. I think they need more dynamism. And look at the rest of the teams like Vålerenga, Bodø, Glimt, Molde. There's a lot of pace in there. There's a lot of skill and flair and intensity and pressing. Rosenborg a little bit more old-fashioned in that way, getting crosses in 4-3-3 that way with sort of target men up front.
Yeah, make it 6 players that they have signed from Allsvenskan, or at least with Allsvenskan roots: Jonathan Augustinsson, Adam Andersen, Stefano Vecchia, as you mentioned, Dino Zamovic, Guillermo Molins, and Rasmus Wiedersheim-Pool in the past sort of 1 to 2 years. So, yeah, big focus on the Swedish market, I suppose. So, if the sporting director wants to come on this show, I'd be quite interested to speak to him and get his perspectives. But you've got them, therefore, in 4th place. So let's see. And if you're a fan of Rosenborg, tweet us at Nordic Footpod. Let us know what you think of that prediction. Are you? Is it blood boiling? Are you happy? You think it will be a fairly astute prediction, given that's where they finished last season? Let us know. But Steve, let's move on to who you've got to round off part 1 in the top 6. In 5th place, you have Viking.
Yeah, and it's very similar to last season. We're now in a state. I think the top 4 will be well clear of the rest, to be honest with you. And then you could make a case from sort of position 5 to sort of 13, 12 or 13, and it could be anyone really. It's just a question of who gets hot, who has a good year, has a bad year. I've gone with Viking in 5th, just simply because of the talent they've got in the squad. Now, it doesn't mean I'm convinced by them at all. I think one of my biggest concerns is the manager situation. They lost Bjarne Berntsen, who did a terrific job in 3 seasons there. He's won them, a Norwegian Cup. He got them promoted last season after a bad start. They finished, I think, in the top 6 or 7. They rebounded well. They've now got a dual manager situation: Bjarte Lunde Arsheim and Morten Jensen. Now, joint managers is not. I can't ever remember this being a thing in Norway, but we've actually got 3 teams at this point in time with joint managers in place, that's unusual for me to be dealing with. I know it's worked well in Djurgården there, but I don't think the joint managers is something that works long term for me. So I don't know who's exactly calling the shots here. It looks like the tactical system is going to be similar to what it's been recently. Maybe a slight switch from sort of 4-3-3 to 4-2-3-1. But I look at the Viking team on paper, Jonathan, and I feel like it could be, you could put pretty much anyone in charge, and they should be able to get them in the top half. There's plenty of quality across the board overall, and that's what I really like about Viking.
I see they've lost Adrian Nielsen Pereira and Zima Batiki and Yildirim Ibrahimai. 2 of them on free transfers, and one of them for quite a hefty sort of outgoing fee. I mean, of the players that have left, is there anyone that you think they're particularly going to miss? I know Batiki you've spoken about in the past quite a few times, 24-year-old. And also in terms of the incomings, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, they are going to miss Batiki and Ibrahima. It's a horrible one to pronounce. He is. I never get him right. Underrated, actually, was Yildirim Ibrahimai. But certainly Batiki had a sensational last season, certainly the back half of last season. And they'll miss his goals, his X factor, and his creativity. But they have signed well. They've brought Kevin Cabran in from relegated start. I feel like Cabran now finally is actually at a good team. I think he can maybe thrive where teams are less focusing on him. He's entering his prime now, 26 years old. Kevin Cabran is sort of an attacker. He can play anywhere in attack, really, but sort of more known for his left-hand side or sort of through the middle. I think he's got a good year in him. They brought back Zlatko Tripic just a couple of days ago. This was announced. If you remember, Tripic was really, really good for them a couple of years back. It didn't work out for him abroad, and he's come back. I think it's a 5-year contract they've got him on. And he will, it's a massive weapon for them to have. He's a quality player. He'll be one of the best. He was in the team of the year. I think we had the joint team of the year just in 2019. That's how good he was last time he was in this league. So they've done good replacements there. I think they're good offensively. Berisha will always score goals. Yander Landley, if he can stay fit. Got good midfield. Joe Bell, Christopher Lockberg, Samuel Fridtjonsson is pretty damn solid. The defence hasn't lost anyone. They've got some good prospects there in defence. Goalkeeper doesn't convince me there still. Probably one of the weak spots. But they on paper they've got good quality, and I really struggle to see them outside of the top half. And I think probably they could end up sort of in no man's land in sort of 5th place with the end of the season. Not really close to the top 4, but I think they could be very, very solid in that spot.
Fantastic stuff, and quite a well-supported team, aren't they, as well? They've always sort of been quite a big club in my opinion. Viking might just be my my memory of the past, but excuse me. I've always thought they were quite a sort of friendly and well supported club. You've got to round off part one in 6th place. Who have you got in 6th place?
Yeah, this is a bit of a sort of my wild card pick. I put Stabaek up in 6th, and the team last year I had Strømsgodset up in 6th as my sort of left field selection. That didn't work out very well, did it? So let's hope for Stabaek's sake it's a bit better. Really tough club to work out. Like there's always a lot of question marks about them. But the interview we did recently with Eirik Schöne, one of the new assistant managers, what I liked what he said there was when I asked him what are the aims for the season, and they want to be competing in the top half of the table, as well as maybe having a good cup run. They want to be up there, and I think when you've got sort of an aim and ambition and motivation and drive, then it can make a difference. They've got a very good coaching team there. Janne Jonsson's experience looks like they've branched out with more assistance and specialisation off the field. They've always got a great youth system coming through. There'll be players that I may have never even heard of yet that will end up getting minutes at some point at Stabaek this year, and you're like, wow, what a great young kid he is. That's the sort of club they are. They can just spring these youngsters from nowhere, but they've signed well. Herelin Charles, I think, is a really versatile player from Vålerenga. They've got a good goalkeeper in Marcus Sandberg, and they've signed a couple of players from the lower leagues as well, like Marcus Solbakken from Amcam, for example, 20-year-old. Looks good. They've got a solid sort of base. I'm a bit worried about striker situation. They still don't have a striker for me that screams goals and reliability, but maybe they can find someone. Maybe even the transfer market or something can help them out there. But if things sort of align for Stabaek, they can get themselves in the top 6. They could equally finish sort of anywhere in the mid-table vicinity. But I think they maybe do a year where they're up there a bit more, and maybe this could be the campaign for it, John.
Yeah, no, I have to say, by the way, I really enjoyed that interview with Eirik Schöne. I thought it was fascinating insights. And as you said, one of the things I was interested to sort of get his opinion on was the football manager side of it, because he said I remember you saying he'd be playing football manager, and he's younger than us. So I did wonder from that point of view, it must be strange going from that to to management as he's done. But so yeah, it was a really great interview. If you've not heard it yet, then go back a couple of weeks, I think it was. With our interview with Eirik Schöne, that was very, very interesting indeed. The new Stabaek assistant manager. Any further comments on Stabaek, Steve? Just to wrap it up before we wrap up part one.
Well, like I say, they're really, because there's so many young players often within the squad, they can be up and down with their form and hard to predict. They have lost Gustav Valsvik at centre back. He was on loan last year from Rosenborg, and I thought he did really well for Stabaek. They haven't signed anyone in defence, so that does concern me a bit. I think they're just relying on. Maybe a couple of, they've got some old hands at the back though, like Jora Mankor as well though. So their form can be up and down. Such a hard team to predict. But I think on the day, they could probably beat anyone on the day. Stabaek, that sort of side. They're an intriguing team to watch. Yeah,
and they've made a hell of a lot of money, haven't they, as well for Eliteserien level. They've sold Andreas Hanche Olsen to Ghent for roughly £800,000. Emil Bohinen for about 1.5 million. And Christopher Askildsen to Sampdoria for about 2.25 million, according to Transfermarkt. So, I mean, that is a huge income for an Eliteserien club, isn't it? Which you don't see too often, to be honest. And that can make the difference, couldn't it, in the short to medium term?
We know they're a selling club. Eirik Schöne admitted that in the interview. They're not. They don't try and hold on to talent for much longer. But I think that kind of helps the players. They know if they make good of themselves, they're going to get a good move away, aren't they? And that sort of thing. They'll say there'll be youngsters that just pop out of the pipeline from nowhere this year. They always seem to breed and bed in a couple of newbies each year. I think if they really had a reliable striker, I'd be a lot more confident about Stabaek. But they're going to rely on like Kinoshita up front, who I don't really rate him, to be honest with you. Fitim Azimi's come back from a loan at Tromsø. Azimi, he's not... he's just not fit enough at times. His injuries get in the way. So they need to address the striker issue. But aside from that, they look in fairly good nick.
Yeah, and they signed Sami Skitter, is their main sort of big signing from Bodø Glimt. So see how, they've obviously got a bit of money to spend. So you never know. Maybe they get to the summer window and bring in a top striker, maybe, potentially. Kinoshita actually played in Sweden as well before. So he was at Halmstad, I remember, many years ago. And didn't put up too many trees, to be honest. Although he looked lively at times, but the team was relegated in the end, I think, that season. So he's an interesting one. I'll be keeping an eye on him. That wraps up part one, and you got your top six there. So we'll just recap it. You have in sixth place Stabaek, in fifth place Viking, in fourth place Rosenborg, in third place Molde, second place Vålerenga, and first place Bodø Glimt. So that is your top six. They are your predicted champions. Coming up part two, we will look at the relegation zone and also mid-table. We'll look at teams like Brann, Lillestrøm, Haugesund, Tromsø, newly promoted side, Strømsgodset and others. So stay tuned, and we will be back, as well as our 10 players to watch for the season to come. Meat Man Soccer's 10 to watch. So stay tuned for part two. We'll be back after this short break.
Did you say Brann for relegation? You have to stay tuned and see where I put them. Catch you after the break.
Welcome to part two of the Nordic Football Podcast Eliteserien 2021 season preview. My name is Jonathan Fadugba, and I'm joined as ever by my colleague Steve Wyss. In part one, we talked about the top six. So I hope you've had a nice little break, and I hope you've had a nice sort of cup of tea or a fika or whatever you have to support, pass the time over the break, and tune yourself in for the rest of this table, because in the seventh place, Steve, you've got a sort of a, well, it's quite a bold prediction, to be honest, isn't it? Because you've got a team who's newly promoted.
Yeah, I've gone with the newly promoted side in seventh place. Can you guess who it is? And no, it's not actually Tromsø. I've gone with Lillestrøm. And you know what? If you want a dark horse for this season, I think you can look at LSK, because I think they're going to be a real bastard side to face. No one is going to enjoy facing them, I don't think. They're going to be physical. They're going to be mean. They're going to be really good from set pieces. They're going to be, digging in really hard. They've just come back into the league, and they don't want to go down again. I think, it was a shock relegation that they had. They're traditionally a very big club. They won the Norwegian Cup not so long ago. And historically, when we've talked about Lillestrøm plenty on this podcast down the years, they were always kind of safely mid-table, that sort of vicinity. And I think they can get back there this year. I think they've signed very well. They've got a good manager. The infrastructure's there for them to make, they've got to probably have a bit of promotion bounce as well, a bit more optimism around the place. And yeah, if you're looking for a dark horse, I think this is the team. Yeah,
I mean, if I recall going back to our end of year review in sort of 2019, Steve, if I remember rightly, you were pretty disparaging of Lillestrøm. I can't remember the exact quote. I've been trying to dig it out, but you did sort of say you weren't going to miss them and that kind of thing. I think words to that effect. Suddenly you're giving them praise and you're putting them high up the table. I mean, they've just been down for a year. So what's changed there? Because I remember that season you didn't have too many nice things to say about Lillestrøm.
They became stale, I think for a good 18-month period, they became very stale. They lacked ambition. They just drifted into a slump. And sometimes a team needs to go down, to make them sort of realise and sort of rebuild again and have a different direction. But they brought in Guy Bakker, who managed Sarpsborg, took Sarpsborg to the Europa League group stages. That's quite a coup of a manager for the Obos-ligaen, and they wanted an immediate bounce back. But I think what they've done, they've learned their lesson. Like they've come up and they've pretty much changed a lot of the squad already. They've brought in a lot of new signings, probably more than most clubs, if you include sort of returnee loans as well. They brought in a couple of really big names, actually, in like Jerman Assen and Paul-Andre Elland. Those are guys that were at Rosenborg last year, aiming to be fighting for medals. They've already got a couple of good sort of weapons here. I think they've signed a couple of new defenders. They've got a goalkeeper on loan from Molde, Alex Kranings, who, he's not bad, Kranings, actually. He's probably an upgrade on what they have at goalkeeper. I think it was a question mark in the Obos last year. They've come up and they've decided that, they knew the weapons they need to bring in. And, you know what you're going to get with this team. I think there's a lot of real physical players that are going to cause mismatches across the board. As I said before, I think they're going to be a menace from set pieces. They'll dig in deep. They'll defend if needed to. there'll be 4-4-2 or 4-3-3, depending on what the coach prefers. And I'm a lot more optimistic about Lillestrøm. I think they can sort of move forward again and with optimism. But probably defense is maybe a little bit weaker at times. But they've got a good mixture of eight. They're a bit younger than they were the last time in the league as well. I like that. They've got technical ability. They've got physical ability. I think they can certainly punch above their weight this time.
Fantastic stuff. Yeah, I haven't been able to quickly dig out your quotes, but I am quite tempted to go back and see what you said about them this stream. But it sounds like you've a lot bigger on them this year, which is great to see. They're quite a well-supported team, aren't they, Steve? Very
well. They are. They're one of the biggest clubs. They're in the Oslo region. Massive rivalry with Vålerenga. Got a pretty big one going with Stabaek as well. But they do have a lot of fans. And, I know back in the day, there were quite a few Lillestrøm fans who listened to this podcast. So, for those who are out there listening again, welcome back to Eliteserien. It's good to have you back. And I hope we end up talking a lot more about them this time than we did sort of in the last 18 months. Like I said, they got stale, they drifted, they became a bit of a not a nothing club, but just wasn't really anything there. And, they do have some very exciting players. For example, in midfield, Ifiani Matthews, I've always enjoyed him. I've always been a big fan of the lad. They've got maybe some youngsters that I'm not that clued up on yet, but who might surprise. So, all in all, I think this sort of football might not be for everyone. It's sort of, at times, it might be a mixture of sort of Big Sam and Warnock, but with sort of good quality, you know what I mean? They're going to shithouse a few teams, but they've got technical ability as well.
Yeah, I think as a Leeds fan, I've got a sort of, I can't see your face right now, but I've got a feeling you got a big smirk on your face at the thought of them shithousing a few teams because, it tends to be the Leeds way at times, isn't it? That's reputation-wise anyway, with pre-Bielsa. But, let's move on. Lillestrøm, welcome back. It's good to see them, and, let's see if they can, I think one thing we've noticed on this podcast, Steve, isn't it? We've written up a few teams who wear yellow in past years, and they've certainly proved us wrong. Elfsborg are now in great form in Sweden, and Lillestrøm are back. So let's see how they get on and if they can match Elfsborg's achievements. In next on your list, in 8th place, bang on mid-table, you've got another big club, and that's Brann.
Yeah, and I'm not getting sucked into the Brann hype this year. I think the last couple of years I've maybe been a bit too high on them, to be honest with you. But I think they finished around mid-table last year. 10th, actually. They were as low as 10th. I think they can probably improve a couple of places this time around, but I'm not all that optimistic about Brann. I think their squad, compared to what the squad was a couple of years ago when they really should have been up there challenging for medals, I think that it's just that they don't have the quality perhaps on paper anymore. And that might be a good or a bad thing that you're kind of getting rid of a few bad eggs and maybe bringing on a few more youngsters. But I just look at this squad now and it just screams to me nothing better than sort of mid-table or sort of upper mid-table at best. And that's my concern for Brann. I feel like we didn't really see enough from them, even when Kåre Ingebrigtsen took over last season, to suggest that they're going to really make waves this year.
Could it be Brann flakes? Could it be bad eggs and Brann flakes for Brann this season? Sounds like quite a tasty breakfast, to be honest. But you've mentioned a few bad eggs there, and I'm interested to get your thoughts on that because they're one of those teams, Steve, aren't they? Where I don't know if you'd compare them to any team in England, Brann, because they're quite a big club, aren't they? But they sort of tend. In my experience following this league the past sort of 4 or 5 years since we've been doing this podcast, I always get the feeling they flatter to deceive.
I think they're a really passionate fan base. They're a well-supported club. I would kind of compare them to Newcastle, actually, except they have won things in sort of the last few decades. Sorry, Newcastle fans. They're a big club. Let's not make no bones about it. They're right up there in terms of support levels and stuff. And I think a lot of the fans are they're always going to be ambitious and optimistic. They all want to be up there challenging. I don't know quite what their realism levels are this year, but I have concerns. I look at the defence; it's quite old. I've got Hakan Opdal in goal, 39-year-old. They just haven't been able to get the goalkeeping situation right in the last few years, in my opinion. Opdal's not bad, but he's no spring chicken. He'll have some good days, but I think they could do with someone a little bit better than him. You got Vegard Foran, Ruben Christiansen, 33-year-old now, them two lads. And then, Koskogen, the centre-back, he is a young prospect who impressed, certainly first half of last season. I like what I saw from him. But there's probably not enough there, There's not enough. The midfield, you used to have like Frederick Horgan was one of the top players in the league. He's now gone. Yeah, he had injury problems, Ordagic has moved on as well. They had Sivert Helter Nielsen, who was good back in the day. They just don't have the sort of the quality in those areas now. And up front, Doda Bamba, we mentioned him a lot last year, didn't we? Well below his expected goals tally. He's got to rebound this time. He's got to be, improve. He's got to deliver them in front of goal instead of missing his chances. I just think they'll be too inconsistent. I think they'll have good and bad days, Brann, and I just don't see them really any better than mid-table.
Yeah, I mean, they finished 10th last season, am I right in saying? And they in looking at Wisecout, and by the way, a shout out to Wisecout, our partners again for this season coming. We will be partnering with them to bring you the latest, fantastic data provider, a data scouting, video scouting, a video analysis platform. We will be partnering again this season in partnership with Just Football. So looking forward to that again with Wisecout. And according to our partners, Wisecout, Stephen, we'll be doing blogs every month as well, which we'll obviously talk about on the podcast and sort of link to on Twitter at Nordic Football. But according to Wisecout, Brann had the 5th highest expected goals against in the league, well, 5th worst basically, which is terrible, really, isn't it? 53.3 xG against. When you look at it, Start, who were relegated, had 56.52. So that doesn't bode well for Brann. Have they done anything to tighten up this defence? And my secondary question here is, after you've answered that, tell us about Bergen, the city itself, because you mentioned they're a big club. As you say, this is a big city as well, isn't it? It's got a sort of a proud history.
They haven't actually signed anyone in defensive areas. They've got a guy back on loan, a youngster called David Moller-Wolf from Asane in the Boss League. He 25 appearances last season. Now, he's only a 19-year-old left back. I've never seen him play. He has been getting minutes in pre-season. He may well be the starting left back for them. I'm not sure. But he could be one to watch. But apart from that, no reinforcements defensively. No reinforcements in sort of defensive midfield either. That just concerns me. I think they needed at least to bring in someone. Maybe centre back certainly would improve in that area. And I think they could be conceding quite a few goals again. To be honest with you, can't be surely as worse as bad as last year. But the city itself, Bergen is on the west coast of Norway. They're a very beautiful city. We did once have a guest on from that region, Sean, knew the club very well and the city very well. But it's a nice part of Norway. Obviously, I've never been there myself, but it's kind of on its own out there. And this is a club that they're very passionate. It deserves better. They should be up there challenging for medals sort of regularly, and they need a plan going forward. They remind me a little bit where Vålerenga were sort of 5 years ago, and I think they need to get a plan sort of in motion now to build for the next sort of half decade, where they need to be up there again. But at the moment, I just don't see enough. I don't see enough of a plan to get them in that position.
There you go. So Brann fans, tweet us on Twitter at Nordic Football. Let us know what you think. I guess it's a slight improvement in fairness. You predicted them to go up slightly. One player that I do think will be one to watch is, I know what you tend to watch coming, but one player I certainly would be keen to watch this season in Eliteserien is Munga Simba at Brann. I've noticed they've signed him from Sweden, from Västerås in the second tier. He actually was playing in the third tier, not long ago, and was then signed by Västerås in August 2020. I noticed him playing in the third tier in some games I saw last season, and I really liked him. I'm not surprised to see him step up to Eliteserien level at all. I thought it would be a matter of time before he moves to a good level. So, if we're looking for sort of fancy player, maybe hidden gems, certainly he'll be one of my watch. 20-year-old Swedish player. So, yeah, Munga Simba, I think keep an eye on him Brann fans. I'm interested.
Yeah, I think he hasn't got a work permit yet or something along those lines. There will be. I was looking at the fantasy for. There's a couple of maybe players to watch. Peter Strand is, I think, their best player overall. He can play anywhere, and he takes a lot of the corners and stuff. But he's a good technical player, Peter Strand. I can't believe I actually haven't mentioned him. I've got to talk about him before we finish about Brann. And I have always rated this guy. I think if he can stay fit, he will be a real stud for them. But he probably needs a bit more quality around him.
Fair enough. Yeah, so there's a few players to watch. Sounds interesting. And they brought in John Goodney Fjolesen as well from Krasnodar. He again wasn't. Oh no, he's not.
He's gone now.
Yeah, he's gone. Transfer marked playing up with my.
Pretty sure he fooled you before, actually. I'm pretty sure he fooled you before.
I think I did the same on the Allsvenskan show as well.
Yeah.
The weird thing is, I've actually seen him play for Hammarby, so this season he's transfer mark sort of nutmegging us here. So yeah, never again will I trust transfer mark on anything to do with John Goodney Fjolesen. Let's move on very quickly and take the bad egg from the egg on my face. Odd in night. That's your prediction. I feel like every single season, odd in night. Probably, I think I'd be right to say that. Steve, am I wrong? Maybe, but you've got odd in night. I get the feeling sometimes you just stick them in night so you can avoid talking about them. So I'm going to put you on the spot here and ask you about odd and tell us about odd.
I think I've got a player to watch in my tend to watch from odd. So maybe we'll talk about it later. They did well last year. Musha Bakenga scored a lot of goals. It surprised me. If they can keep getting goals out of him, then I think they're going to do quite well. But they've lost Vebjørn Hoff, who was really amazing for them in midfield in 2020. They've lost Elva Rashani, who didn't always have the output you would expect from him, but he was a big player. Teams could focus on him. This is a team for me that lack depth. Really, they've got sprinkling of quality all over the field. Espen Ruud has been massive for them, the veteran right back in recent years. He's 37-year-old now, though. He's had injured his Achilles, and he's out till the middle of summer, that's a big blow. Stefan Hagen, 35-year-old centre back. How much more is in his legs? They've signed Magnus Lekven in midfield, 33-year-old. I'm making them sound like geriatrics here. It's not just, they do have youngsters as well. They've got a reasonable mix and stuff. I just think they're going to be a bit inconsistent. I think they'll be good at home, but away from home, I'm a bit doubtful. And they do need Bakenga to keep scoring goals. And last season was the only season he's ever really been a consistent goal scorer. And I just wonder whether that's going to be a trend where he kicks on from last year. And there's no reason why he shouldn't. In fairness, I think he will go well. But it could have been just maybe a flash in the pan for 2020. I'm not sure. They've signed a couple of interesting youngsters. Conrad Wallen from Arundel. They've signed a centre back, Solomon Owusu from Raufoss, quite a small technical defender, I do believe. Got a goalkeeper in Sondre Rosbeck, a fairly good one. They'll be knocking around mid-table again, I think. Jonathan, maybe even could push top half. But there's nothing quite remarkable about them, I wouldn't say.
Nothing quite remarkable except the fact that they are the oldest football club in Norway, according to their website.
Really?
Norway's oldest existing football club, founded in 1894. So that's a pretty big achievement in itself. So if you're looking for a team with history, then Odd could be the team for you. I know, Steve. They don't normally have too much going on the pitch, do they? Maybe potentially, but they did have Fagoma before as a head coach.
Yeah,
and he established them quite well. They've also played Dortmund in European competition in the past sort of 10 years or so. 2015 against Dortmund in Europa League qualifiers. So they've got a few. I don't know what it is about Odd, but I quite like them for some reason. There's something about them that I do. Maybe it's the logo. And I know we're having our sort of logo competition in Allsvenskan. There's something about.
Yeah, I could see if when we do the Eliteserien logo thing, they will be up there with a chance of winning that.
I mean, are they quite well supported? Are they? I mean, it looks to me like they're quite well supported from what I can see. Stadium capacity 12,000. we don't seem to sort of have many people who follow us on the pod, do they? Who support us necessarily? They're quite a big. Are they? Who would you compare them to in, say England or whatever? Are they quite well? I mean, I know they wear black and white, so I don't want you to say Newcastle, but are they quite well supported, or are they punching above their weight? Are they not punching above their weight? What's the?
They're from the city of Skien, which is kind of in the middle of nowhere-ish between sort of southwest region. The problem is with Odd, they don't really have a rival. I don't think there's any clubs that like really hate them or anything. I mean, Sandefjord is sort of a little bit of a soft rivalry, but they don't really have that spice with any. They don't really have any beef with any clubs. They're not badly supported, but they're not obviously overly supported either. Just because of the region they're in. I don't mind them. I hope we can talk more about them this year. Really, they're not boring by any means. They do have some exciting young players in there. I'm going to talk about one of them later. And Joshua Kitolano, by the way, is another youngster in midfield who's really coming on and developing. Marcus Corsa's got better now. Odin Bjertoft, they've developed. They've got some good young talent. In terms of a comparison, I mean, who in like England in the top two leagues doesn't really have a rival that no one really cares about? I can't really try to think of someone. I guess you could say it's sort of like Southampton, maybe. Although, they've got Portsmouth, they've got Portsmouth actually, haven't they? But you're looking for a club that's not really hated by anyone. That sort of side, really.
I can't think off the top of my head. I can't think of anyone who's not hated by someone.
I know.
But yeah, I get your point. I do understand what you're saying there. So let's move on. The sort of team to be honest, I could imagine getting myself into. I could imagine being them on Football Manager. They're the sort of team that I don't know what it is about them, but they do kind of appeal to me. If you do support Odd, then please let us know, because I'd be very interested to talk to you and find out a little bit more about them. But you've got them in 9th, and in 10th place, you've got another team that we don't tend to talk about too much, and that is Haugesund.
Yeah, I just feel like, I was on about Lillestrøm, sort of gradually drifted over the last 2 or 3 years. They're in the league. I do wonder if Haugesund might go down that route if they're not careful. They're very little action in and out of the club this winter, which, I mean, that can be a good thing, don't get me wrong. They've lost Christian Grindheim, who was a really big sort of influence in the dressing room, experienced veteran midfielder, 37-year-old. He maybe wasn't quite as impactful on the pitch, but I think he could be missed in the dressing room. They've got they lack depth. The squad lacks depth, in my opinion. If they get injuries, they're in trouble. But their actual starting 11 and sort of bench is not bad. It's quite good in places. They've always got good defensive strength. Mikkel Desler, Alexander Stolas, Fredrik Pallesen Knudsen, and Benjamin Hansen. That is a pretty good back four when it's available. Ulrik Fredriksson as well, good option. But outside that, who have they got? Goalkeeper situation could be. I'm not even sure who's going to start in goal for them. Actually, could be one of three keepers. I'm not entirely sure. Their midfield's got a couple of good players like Bruno Leiter, Thore Pedersen, and in attack they've got sort of wild cards like Christopher Velder, who can be really good on this day. Ibrahim Awaji missed like half of last year with his drugs ban, but now they're going to have him for a full season. He's a key man, Ibrahim Awaji. They need goals off him. They signed Sondre Liseth from Mjøndalen, who could go quite well, and they've brought a guy in from Sogndal in the second league, Aliun Endor, 9 goals and 6 assists for Sogndal last season. So he can play sort of out the wings or up front. He could be an interesting signing. I don't know much about him, Aliun Endor. Want to watch. They've got enough quality to easily avoid getting sucked into a relegation battle, but I think they should hover around mid-table again. Not really too much to say about Haugesund, if I'm being brutally honest.
Now, I do ask this every single season, but is my man Bruno Leite still there?
Yeah, he's still there. He's an important player for them in midfield. He's quite consistent there, performer. I know you've always been a fan of him, and yeah, I've always quite rated him myself, really.
Yeah, I do like Bruno Leite. He's one I always thought might go on, but it doesn't seem like it. He's been there for quite a while now, probably about as long as we've done this podcast. So I'm going to ask you a bit of a question here, Steve, before we move on to 11. Has there been a dip in quality in Eliteserien in the last sort of couple of years of the mid-range teams? Has there been a stretching out of the quality in this league? Because I get the impression that there's now sort of 5 good teams, maybe potentially, and I get the impression that 6 to 12, maybe you could argue, is much of a muchness? Is that your general feeling?
Yeah, I would agree. Certainly in terms of much of a muchness. Not saying the quality. I think probably the quality maybe has gone down a little bit. I think anyone at those clubs that sort of really shows great promise will move on quite quickly. I think in the past, all of these teams always kind of had sort of a legend of the club. Even a veteran that's come back somewhere and been a key star man. I think that probably a lot of these teams lack that now. It doesn't help that big clubs like Brann are predicted down sort of in mid-table at the minute. But I would kind of agree with you. It's maybe a good point that the quality's dipped a little bit, not significantly, but it has a little bit, yeah.
And what's the reason for that? Is that down to recruitment? Is that down to poor scouting? Is that down to less money? Is that down to COVID?
COVID, I think, just a collection of small factors. And I think, it is harder. If you've got a really good talent on your hands, it's harder to keep hold of them, isn't it? Simple as that, really. In terms of Haugesund here, I think they'll have some good days and bad days, really. And they're at the best when they're defending well, this club, this team, grinding out the clean sheets and stuff. But they just have wild dips in and out of form. It's quite hard to predict. But when the defence dries up and they start making mistakes, they have problems because they can't rely on their attack to help them out. But when the defence starts firing, they're consistent in that area. They're a handful for anyone, especially on their own surface, which is grass surface. The weather can get quite windy at Haugesund, and it's not a nice place to visit if the forecast is bad.
Let's move on then. So you got Odd in 9th, Haugesund in 10th. Who have you got in 11th?
Let's see. Who I got in 11th? Oh, I got Kristiansund this year. I think that's probably an upgrade on what I normally give them, and they usually finish about 6th, don't they? So it's the same old pattern for Kristiansund, but I always just end up looking at them. They have to have a down season at some point soon. It just has to happen. They constantly overachieved in recent years, but how do you replace someone like Amal Pellegrino, who scored 25 goals and also 5 assists? He was an absolute monster for them. And in pre-season, I think they've struggled for goals. He was at times it felt like they were one-dimensional in attack. It really did, and that is my big concern for Kristiansund this year. Where are the goals going to come from without Pellegrino?
Yeah, and they lost their last friendly match before the season's set to begin. They've got a few tough opening games, but nothing maybe they can't navigate. What's the general, is there much to say about them? I quite like them because they've always proved you wrong. I remember you predicted them to go down about 3 years running. And they've always punched you in the face. I remember them beating Rosenborg a couple of times as well when Rosenborg was sort of a big club in this league, when they were the top dog, or at least getting some points off them. So I've always quite liked their underdog status. They start with Molde away, which isn't easiest, is it? But, what's their sort of formation? What are they looking to play? What's their style of play like? What are the reasons to sort of follow them if someone was looking to follow them?
They'll usually play 4-3-3, sometimes 4-2-3-1. They're a counter-attacking team. They will not have much of the ball. If you look at the possession stats year on year, they'll be right down there, like probably 41 to 44%. So they actually have problems when in matches where they're favourites, expecting to break down teams. But they're lethal on the break. That's why they have given problems to some of the bigger teams in the last few years. Like Molde, you mentioned that. They had a couple of 2-2 draws against Molde last year. They will hit sides on the break, and obviously Pellegrino was a big weapon for them in that sort of area. They got pace up front. But, Flamur Castrati is one of the guys they're going to be relying on these counterattacks now. He really just couldn't hit a barn door last year. They've got Faris Pemi Mumbanga, another speedster, but he lacks a bit of clinicality. They've signed a guy from a Danish second division side, Federica, called Agon Mukoli. He might be quite decent. They do actually have a good record in the transfer market, unearthing a few gems. There's a guy from Sturdel's Blink. They brought in Sander Erik Carter, a centre midfielder. I don't know much about him, but I wouldn't be surprised. He did well last year, 6 goals, 9 assists in the Obos League game. So, he's probably sort of a conveyor belt of talent. They do rotate the squad a lot. It's quite a big squad, a lot of depth here. That's a big positive for Kristiansund, and you often get the manager rotate it around, like I say, keep players fresh. They'll be well suited first 15 games.
Great stuff. And interesting overview of their transfers there. Like you say, they do tend to bring in quite a few interesting players. They've lost the man. Well, hopefully, I'm checking transfer now, and I'm a bit nervous every time I check it because they might throw me a curveball again. But they've also lost your man Christopher Sike, haven't they? Or Psyche, the best name in football.
Yeah, he was sort of Christopher Sike. He was a fantasy god at one point, wasn't he? Where he clean sheets and goals. He wasn't quite getting in the team as much as he would have wanted to, I don't think, back end of last year. The defence sort of often. I mean, it's got some decent underrated defenders like Aliou Coley, Hotmark. They've got a new lad in from Raufoss, Snor Strand Nielsen, a great name that is. He's a right back, but he can play across the board, I think, at the back. They just tend to have a lot of underrated players. They've got Amadou Mido Diop, who's a great midfielder, I think, a real engine, sort of Patrick Vieira type engine and build, actually. And they've got a lot of players who can play in a bunch of different positions. So, you know what? I've predicted them in 11th, and I'm already regretting it. I just know they're going to somehow get much higher than that. But I just fear that the year I predict them high, they're going to be awful. So
yeah, they hate you and you hate them.
I don't hate them. No, I hate them. I don't like them. But
well, no, not hate, but you predict them low, they go high. I think they just enjoy putting one on you, which is, I've got to say, a big reason why I've got a big soft spot for them. And as for Snor Strand Nielsen, let's just hope he doesn't fall asleep at the back.
Oh, goodness me.
Moving on. In 12th, you've got Sarpsborg.
Yeah, we're starting to get towards teams I think could get sucked into a relegation battle now. I'm not saying Kristiansund will, by the way. I think they'll be absolutely fine. But I think Sarpsborg are a tough one. If things go wrong, I think they maybe could get sucked into trouble. They play an unusual formation. You know, we did a very in-depth tactical analysis episode on three at the back recently. If you haven't already listened or viewed that on YouTube, do give it a whirl. It was the most recent episode. But Sarpsborg are using a 3-4-3 formation under Mickey Stara. And do you know what? I think it's just at times they got badly exposed last year. They didn't score enough goals. They had a good record generally against sides down there, that's a positive. I'm really struggling actually in terms of their prediction. I think they could be anything. They could be down there struggling, or if things go right, they could be top half. It's a difficult one to work out with them because they are a bit unusual. Like I said, they're a different system to everyone else, and sometimes it gives them a good matchup, sometimes it doesn't. They've signed quite a lot of players, which might work out, it might not. I'm really struggling with this team this year, to be honest, Jonathan. I think
I can tell.
It could be anything.
Sounds like, yeah. I mean, that's a fair point. Sarpsborg, I don't know about them. It seems like a bit of a not pulled up too many trees, have they recently? I mean, they used to be all right, didn't they? Yeah,
I think they used to be very predictable. You knew what you were going to get with them under Guy Backer, 4-4-2. And they were pretty easy to predict, really. They were up there. They were challenging top half. They had a great year in Europa League. Now it just feels like I think they lacked goals at times last year. That was my big concern. I'm not sure they're getting them this year either. Although they haven't lacked for signing strikers. They've signed 4 this off-season. They've brought a guy called Mubarak Kompore, who I think is going to be more backup. They brought Christian Opseth in from Bengaluru in India. Ex-Bodø Glimt man. He was a proven goal scorer at his levels. I think if he gets service, he can go well. Ibrahim Kone's come in. And Rashad Mohammed, who they once sold actually for £600,000 to a Turkish club. He's on his way back. They've already got guys like Stefan Shalovic and Moss. I mean, if they're only playing with one striker, who's going to get the job? I don't know. But it's just like they're kind of searching for this guy who's going to get them goals. They've got on paper, they've got enough quality in defence and midfield that they should be fine. It's just I feel like the system doesn't always work, and they can get dragged into negativity. And, this could be a really low prediction or it could be accurate. It's, as I say, it's just a tough side.
Yeah, fair enough. Sounds sort of fairly tough to predict, but you've got them to sort of keep their head above water this season, certainly. Now let's, on that subject, move towards the relegation zone because we've got 4 teams left. 2 will go down. 1 will be in the relegation playoff. Now, traditionally, we sort of do touch on these relegation teams in some detail, but you made an interesting point before we started recording. Why are we giving these relegation teams so much airtime? So I don't know if you want to just go through your predicted bottom four right now in order. You fancy doing that, Steve?
Yeah, well, in 13th place, I've got Tromsø, newly promoted Tromsø, of course. 14th for the playoff spot, Strømsgodset. 15th, I'm going Mjøndalen this year. 16th, I'm going with Sandefjord. So, yeah, those bottom two straight down. And I think these are the four teams that look most at risk of getting dragged into trouble, really. And if we're being honest, I was a little bit negative perhaps about Sarpsborg then. If I look at them on paper, they've surely got enough to avoid a relegation battle. So I think for these four teams are going to be fighting it out.
The two I'm quite keen to touch on, although Mjøndalen as well, to be fair, we've had some compelling interviews with them in the past, haven't we, and their manager. But I'm quite keen to touch on Tromsø and the kind of nightmare that's been going on at Strømsgodset, because that is a bit of a chaotic situation, isn't it? But I want to let's start on the positive with Tromsø. They're back, and bit of a hellish year for them, isn't it? Because they've obviously won promotion, won the Obos League end, didn't they, as well? But they did have to watch their neighbours, go through nearly an unbeaten season. And traditionally, they're actually considered a bigger club than Bodø Glimt, aren't they, Steve? So just tell us about that northern rivalry up there, and how good is it to have Tromsø back?
It is great to have them back. It's the first game of the season, actually, Bodø Glimt against Tromsø. But I mean, they've fallen on times that they wouldn't have expected. Going down. I suppose going down isn't unusual for them, but to see Bodø Glimt rise must be very painful. I mean, this kind of sums it up. They've brought in Isaac Amundsen on loan from Bodø Glimt. I mean, that's almost embarrassing, I think, for Tromsø to be relying on on a youngster from Glimt to help them out. But at the end of the day, they've got to be practical here. They need to stay in the league, and this is a squad. It's not the most in-depth squad. They've not signed too many new guys this year, but I'm positive. I think they're going to use the home advantage well. It's a long way up north. If they get that right, they can use that to their advantage. They've got some experience in defence. Simon Wang's still going on. I think midfield, they've got Ruben Jensen, who's again another veteran of skill and experience, and that'll go well. They got some sort of interesting players like Eric Catalano, Rune Espejord, if they can stay fit. And I think they've got enough. Moses Debies looks like an interesting sign from HamKam. I think they can just about have enough to keep their heads above water, but it will be a bit of battle for Tromsø. They've got to stay in the league this year and build from there. And obviously it doesn't help with the Bodø Glimt situation.
Yeah, you're predicting a successful season for them in the sense that you think they'll stay up, but a bit of a nightmare part 2 on Elm Street, because you're also predicting that they'll have to watch Bodø Glimt win the league again. So certainly an interesting one to keep track of, and that is an interesting rivalry there that we may cover in weeks to come. And obviously, like you said, they play each other first game of the season. So I'm sure we'll have a few things to say about that. And I find it quite interesting, isn't it? Because it shows you how rivalries can sort of transform and turn, isn't it? Tromsø fans maybe 5-10 years ago might never have seen this coming, but it shows you how football can switch quite quickly, doesn't it? And you're sort of I've seen this happen before myself with Man United, Man City. In fairness, it's almost quite an apt comparison to me in some ways. The team becoming sort of the nasty neighbours or whatever they call it, isn't it? So that's one to follow for the seasons to come. But in the relegation playoff, you've gone for Strømsgodset. Now this is let's say a lot of turbulence at the club, isn't it, Steve?
It's a mess. It's an absolute mess. I mean, on the field, they were a bit of a mess the last 2 seasons, only just surviving by the skin of their teeth. And I always actually thought Henrik Pedersen was initially moving the club in the right direction, although last year a lot would disagree with that. And you can't really argue with the results. But really what's gone wrong for them is now off the field in the off-season. It was a very documented event. We probably should have touched on this in an episode at some point, but I don't think we quite had the right timing, but we certainly will now. But there was basically Henrik Pedersen has ended up losing his job, as Strømsgodset, the manager, due to, unfortunately, some racial accusations that he incited towards a player on the training field. Some other stuff came out that he was sexist towards a female reporter. things like that. And, probably sort of a no smoke without fire thing. He strongly rejected these claims, but, one thing after another, and ultimately he's left his job by mutual consent. They sacked him. His position became untenable. When 7 players accused the manager of using some racial terms, it's very unacceptable, isn't it? And forgetting the racial aspect for a minute, it kind of sums up Strømsgodset in the last 2-3 years. They just seem a mess of a club. They're sliding. They're getting not stale, but they're in this slump. And I mentioned Lillestrøm before. I just said at some point they're going to go down. This club, I don't know when. Maybe it'll be this season. Maybe it'll be next. But until they sort themselves out, they're heading in one direction. It's downwards.
It's a fascinating insight there, and a bit of a nightmare. I mean, it did finish 13th last season, so you're only. I mean, usually when a club goes into this sort of massive turmoil with the whole board and everyone at odds against each other, the players, the managers, you suggest that they might dip quite further down than one place. But you've only got them to go down one place. So what are the potential positives that you think could see them sort of maybe just stay up by the skin of the teeth? Because it's only, like I say, a dip of one place, so it's not potentially a disaster for them, is it? From your point of view, or is it?
Yeah. Why am I positive? Because on paper they've actually got a better. On paper they've got a better quality squad than the two that I'm going to talk about soon. Mjøndalen and Sandefjord, and they've got a better quality on paper than Tromsø as well, really, and maybe even a couple of teams in sort of mid-table vicinity. When we look at the back, they've got like Lars Velsvik. He was one of the best right backs in the league not too long ago. Jonathan Parr, Nicholas Mikkelson's a good young prospect. They've got a couple of centre backs. Duplex Chamber if he's fit. Leifson wasn't too bad last season. In midfield, Mikkel Meigaard's pretty good technically. Can't knock that. Johan Hover is a really interesting prospect in midfield. Up front, they did have Lars Jørgen Salvesen, a great target man. Sadly, he's out for the season, done his ACL in. That's a massive loss, by the way. Absolutely huge player for them. They brought in Fred Friday from AZ Alkmaar. Seen a lot of different opinions about him over the off-season. I think he can score goals. But, the jury's out. He's the only signing, actually, Fred Friday. They've really been quiet in the transfer market. Godset, and I'm not sure. I don't think that's a good thing. They've now got 2 joint managers, Bjørn Petter Ingebrigtsen, who's managed them before, and Håkon Wiebelund, who's another guy who was in charge of them briefly at one point. They're interim, so they need to sort the managerial situation out. They need to bring in someone permanently, make him the boss. But yeah, I mean, on paper they do have some quality on the board if things can go right. But I sense there's a bad atmosphere around the place. They're not well managed, and maybe the recruitment's not what it should be. So that's really the main reasons that I really think they're going to struggle. Even then, though, they should probably have enough to avoid direct relegation.
Fair enough in that. So there's the reasons. So thanks for that, Steve. A good overview. Like you said, it was a bit of a mess of a club in terms of the situation. It was clarified by the club board and that kind of thing. So. We say goodbye to Pedersen, but in sort of slightly disappointing terms, really, isn't it? But you've got 2 to go down. There has to be 2 that go down, and you've got Mjøndalen and Sandefjord.
Yeah, Mjøndalen. For me, Mjøndalen have the worst squad on paper, probably. And they hung on. I don't know how they stayed up last year, to be honest. They wouldn't have stayed up were it not for VAR. If VAR was actually in the playoff match, they would have gone down. There was a key decision late in that game, an offside that enabled them to stay up. And ultimately, as I say, on paper, it's a weak squad. They just lack the quality, the resources here. Vegard Hansen's done a fantastic job to keep them so competitive. Physical side, great on set pieces, but they do lack quality and depth. And the reason I've not got them bottom is because he always gets the most out of them, and they'll probably get points when they shouldn't. But for me, they do lack the quality on paper. And Sandefjord, again, it's a weak-looking squad. Really, the main reason I think they stayed up last season was the manager, Marty Cifuentes, was just this tactical genius at times. He really got the absolute most out of the team. He's moved on now to a club in Denmark. So that'll be a big loss. Sandefjord finished 11th last year, but they definitely overachieved in terms of the points, expected goals and stuff like that. I think they can regress to the mean. They're not shocking, they've got both sides do have the odd good player in there, but I just think it's significantly a worse looking. These two teams do have the worst looking squads on paper, and that ultimately will tell. Sandefjord, by the way, they've got a joint manager situation as well. Hans-Erik Odegaard and Andreas Tegström are in charge. Again, I don't like that. I think you need a main man in charge. I just don't think the joint thing will work. And I could see them. The last time they're in the league, they survived the first season, and then the next year they were rock bottom. And something similar again. Sadly, I think for Sandefjord, I think both these sides go down automatically.
Fair enough. That's a pretty fair enough overview. So let's recap the table before we take a break before part 3 and our 10 to watch. So we've got 16th Sandefjord, 15th Mjøndalen, 14th Strømsgodset, 13th Tromsø, 12th Sarpsborg, 11th Kristiansund, 10th Haugesund, 9th Odds BK, 8th Brann, 7th Lillestrøm, 6th Stabaek, 5th Viking, 4th Rosenborg, 3rd Molde, 2nd Vålerenga, 1st and champions retaining the title Bodø Glimt. Are you happy with your table, Steve?
No, because I know there's going to be teams that prove me completely wrong, but hopefully I get a few right as well. And time will tell.
Fair enough, fantastic stuff. And that's it for part 2. Coming in part 3, we'll look at your 10 to watch. And I'm quite excited about this because it's always a famous part of it's always a popular part of the podcast. So tune in part 3 and we will go through Meat Man Soccer's 10 to watch in the Eliteserien this season. Stay tuned. Welcome to part 3 of the Nordic Football Podcast, Eliteserien 2021 Norway season preview. The special episode, as we did in Sweden a few weeks ago. And the final part of this episode is the 10 players to watch for you this season. Maybe this could be for your fantasy team, could be just in general, could be players that we think are gonna, excel and then move on to pastures new, catch them while you can style. So generally speaking, before we get into this, Steve, there's been a real sort of influx of interest in Scandinavia and Norway in particular, isn't it, for players at the moment, just because of the success of the likes of Hauge, Hakon Evjen and others, isn't there? So just give us an overview before we get into your 10 of what the situation, a lot of teams are being scouted, aren't they, at this moment in time in the Eliteserien?
I think there's never been more interest in players in this region than there has been now. Simply because of the talent that's come through there in the recent years. I think teams are taking note of, suddenly, hold on a minute, there's a bit of a hotbed here going on. And I also think it's probably becomes an attractive place for certain players to come into as well, because they think they're going to get noticed more. So, there's certainly, in terms of my 10 to watch here this year, I always like to have 2 or 3 older guys in. But in this particular instance, I've only gone with sort of one guy. One older dog. Most of me tend to watch are on the younger side, who can probably develop and, ultimately may end up leaving the league even this season.
Yeah, we tend to have different approaches on this podcast. Myself and Steve, I usually go for young players who I think will leave the league, and I do like my 10 to watch. Whereas you like you say, you tend to go for a bit more established. But I noticed on this list, there's quite a few young players here, Steve. So you had a bit of a change of heart, haven't you?
I have, and
you come into my thinking.
Yes, I think it's your influence here. But I probably could have maybe put a couple more veterans on there. The way I see it, 10 to watch, it's not always about youngsters that come through and develop and going to become better. It's about players that can make an impact for their club this season. Whether he's 35-year-old, one to watch can mean one to watch in many different ways.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think we have slightly different approaches, but it's that makes for an interesting debate, an interesting podcast. That's the whole point of it. We're both strong-minded and we have our own opinions on what one to watch means. So that's the beauty of this show. There's no rules, and you can kind of do what we want to a certain extent from that point of view. So, Steve, take away your 10 to watch for this season. I don't know if you want to go in order of name and then a bit of an explanation, or do you want to read off the names, and then we'll go into them?
I think we'll go into. I don't know what I'll read them all out now, actually.
Yes.
And Ola Solbakken from Bodø Glimt, Arne Stellan Hegebo from Brann, Gjermund Asen, the only really old guy on this list from Lillestrøm, Emil Konradsen Saida from Rosenborg, a bit of a controversial one there for those who know this podcast. David Datro from Molde, Philip Ronigan Jorgensen from Odd, Eric Kitolano, Tromsø, Henrik Hegheim, Viking, Zacharias Opsal from Vålerenga, and Sturla Ottersen from Stabaek. And I will start things off with Ola Solbakken at Bodø Glimt. And I feel like, for me, he's the first name on my fantasy sheet this year, because he is going to be taking over the likes of the sort of the Zinkernagel role or the Jens Petter Hauge role out wide. And I saw signs at the back end of last year that he was going to sort of develop and improve and fill those boots. He's a bit more physical than both of them. He's a bit more height to him, and I feel like he's got a bit more physical strength. Maybe he lacks it technically and agility-wise compared to them guys, but he's older now. He's going to get a lot of minutes to the side. Someone is going to be picking up the the goals and assists and stuff in this Bodø Glimt system. I think Solbakken is primed to do that. So he's the first guy on my list to watch.
Yeah, as you mentioned, 22-year-old winger from Bodø Glimt. An interesting one. What style of winger is he?
Not quite wide target man, but he's a bit more sort of physical. I think he glides on the ball quite well, actually. Just kind of makes things happen, and I think over the winter he probably will improve a lot more. I'm looking forward to seeing him in action again. Always rated his finishing is quite good, actually. Probably maybe a bit more clinical than the likes of Zinkernagel and that, potentially, if he works on it a bit more. So I think he can have a really big year in a quality team, in a quality system that will create a lot of chances.
Very interesting stuff. Second on your list is, as you say, Arne Stellan Hegebo, 19-year-old striker at Brann.
Yeah, now, the thing is at Brann, I mentioned Oda Bamba before, how he flattered to deceive last year. Now, if that continues, I think the manager's going to have to look at either shifting on Bamba or dropping him. And this young lad who was on loan last year in the Obos again for Ørgaard scored 9 goals and also had 9 assists. Now, he can play striker. I think he can play out wide as well a bit, which is handy in a 4-3-3 system. But I think he'll start the season as like the first substitute that comes on in attack. And if he takes his chances, he could end up becoming a starter if other players fail. So, if Bamba's not knocking him in and he's, struggling again, why not give this Hegebo a go up top? And, I don't know an awful lot about him, but I think he definitely is one to watch. If that's a fair record in a poor side in the Obos last year. And I think Brann would be foolish not to give him minutes to develop. So he could be certainly a surprise.
Next on your list, you've got Gjermund Asen, and this is the oldest player on your list, isn't it? It's a bit of an old head here.
Yeah, I just feel like he has been one of the better players actually at Rosenborg in the last 2 years. He's been hampered by injury a bit. He's not been played in the right positions. He's not been given fair enough crack of the whip. And there's more in his tank. I've always rated him. He's a great talent. He's been around the block. He's 30 now. This Lillestrøm side is going to rebound. I think he'll be on quite a few of the set pieces at times. He'll be a driving force, use his experience if he can stay fit. And I just always sense there's a lot more for him to give in recent times, and he could explode again here at Lillestrøm this season. He's old, he's 30 now, but I really think this could be a golden year for Gjermund Asen.
Now, the next player on your list, it's a bit of a controversial one here, Steve. I don't want to say too much, so I'm going to just let you introduce him, and then I'll make my comments afterwards.
So this is Emil Konradsen Saida at Rosenborg. Now, there was an episode. Now, was it last year, Jonathan, or was it the year before? Last season I kind of really ridiculed him. I was slagging him off a bit. So basically, I'm just covering my own arse here. No, the thing is, right. I believe if Rosenborg are to have a good year, he has to explode. For me, it's now or never for this player. He has to kick on now. And he's only 20-year-old, and I kind of criticised him last year. I said I don't think he ever will reach a certain level. But if he is to actually sort of exceed himself and kick on, for me, it has to be now. It's near enough now or never. He's the one player in that Rosenborg team who's got the pace, the flair, and maybe sort of the unexpected nature. He can make things happen. His decision making, I still don't trust it. I still don't trust his finishing, but he can make things happen. And he's kind of the odd one out in that sort of midfield and attack. He offers something different to them. And if things go right for him, he does make some strides. He could have a big year. He could. He's just an interesting player for me. I've got a good feeling he might surprise in a positive way. But equally, he doesn't make these developments. He could flop. But just a gut feeling here. He because they need him to perform. He goes well.
Yeah, I remember that show quite vividly. Yeah, you did. I think the funny thing about it was we picked our sort of two talent. It was a talent focus, wasn't it? And you took your talent focus and that's how you ripped into pieces. So, but I do think as you've identified there, there is a bit of a gem of a player in there somewhere. I think that was what we can sort of get across, and let's see if he can kind of show why he's so widely kind of tipped to be a big player. So let's see how he gets on. Emil Conradson's side is certainly one to watch this season. Now, the next player on your list is someone that I remember talking about in pre-season, ahead of Molde's big game in the Europa League against Hoffenheim. He caught my eye, certainly. I remember reading his name on the team sheet to you, and you've now seen enough to put him on your 10 to watch. Yeah,
David Detra Fofana at Molde, striker, attacker. They signed him from Abidjan City, and he was compared to very highly. When this move happened, we saw him in the Europa League. If he's catching against Hoffenheim, he's only 18-year-old, which let's be realistic here. Let's not expect miracles. He's still going to be raw at times, and whether or not he's going to be regularly starting, I'm not sure. But it's clear Molde have a gem of a player on their hands here, who will develop as the season goes on. He's very physical, fast, and it looked like he's got the technique as well to shine. He could prove absolutely lethal at times, and this is a very obvious 10 player in the 10 to watch list. I'd imagine he would make most people's list, really. You just simply have to make the point that, he is one to watch.
Yeah, I like what I've seen of him, to be honest. I think he's got a lot of potential. Let's move on, and you've got Philip Ronningen Jorgensen next on your list, and it's an odd player.
Yeah, I noticed he was getting more minutes last year. This is a defensive midfielder, sort of centre mid as well. Philip Ronningen Jorgensen, 19-year-old. And, I think another year under his belt, another winter under his belt, he can develop. And but they've lost Vebjørn Hoff to Rosenborg. It kind of opens up a slot. And they have brought in Magnus Lekven from Vålerenga, but he's getting on a bit. He's 33. He's not going to start all the time. I think it's time that Jorgensen steps up a bit. And they've got the makings of an interesting sort of midfield now, with youngsters like Joshua Kitolano, Marcus Corsa is still quite young as well. But Jorgensen could make that step up, become more of a regular starter this year. He's got a good mixture of sort of physique and technique. And now he's another year old at 19. He could be, it's not a flash position, is it? Sort of centre midfield, defensive midfielder. But this is a spot, he's doing a lot of dirty work and everything like that. But I feel like he can certainly become a regular starter for Rod by the end of this season and could go very well.
One extra reason to watch Odd BK this season, then that's what I like to hear. So Eric Kitolano is next on your list.
Well, the force runs strong in the Kitolano family, doesn't it? As they say, and there's so many around. They're like rabbits. But Eric Kitolano, I think if Tromsø are going to have a good year, he's going to play a big part. He in the Obos last season, he scored 11 goals and provided 6 assists as well. Quite where his best position is, I'm not sure. I genuinely list him, and he can play anywhere, sort of in midfield and attack, striker as well. I'm not sure exactly where he's going to feature, but dynamic player. He'll offer them some, good sort of pacey option at times. And as with all the Catalanos, they can be a bit wavy in front of goal sometimes, maybe like a bit of composure. But an exciting player for Tromsø. They're going to need someone a bit reliable in that spot. I think he's one of the less injury-prone players for them in that area of the field as well. So he will play, anywhere in that sort of final third, even centre mid. So Eric Catalano at Tromsø. I wanted to get a Tromsø player on this 10 to watch list. So felt like I could have gone with Moses Abi, but I think Eric Catalano definitely one to watch this year.
Yeah, it's quite a diverse list of players in terms of clubs. You've got a good variety here, and Tromsø one to watch. Catalanos, I've got to say, I find it hard to keep up with the Catalanos this time. Maybe they should have a series a bit like keeping up with the Kardashians. But no, fair enough. It's good to see a sporting family, clearly. Next on your list, you've got a player at Viking, and you've got a centre-back here.
Yeah, Henrik Hegheim, I think I wrote about him on one of the Y-Scout blogs last year. This is a pretty obvious one. It's almost a bit cheating, actually, because he was so good last year that, you could even include him as a 10 to watch. I just think he can get even better. 19-year-old centre-back. He can work on the weaknesses in his game and really improve. I think he's got a hell of a year ahead of him. I think by the end of this season, he could end up moving on, either out of the league or to maybe one of the big clubs in the Eliteserien. I think hopefully Viking can keep hold of him for a whole season at least. But I think I talked to him a bit last year. Really good young prospect in defence who's got great physicals and he's got a good sense of positioning, especially. So I was good. I wanted to include a centre back on this list. Sadly, and I'm absolutely gutted at this, I've not got a goalkeeper on this 10 to watch list or this season, which I hate that. I love my goalkeepers. I just couldn't find anyone really worth putting on there. I had Christopher Claassen last year, so I couldn't have him again. So I was a bit gutted about lack of goalkeepers. But we've got a good centre back on the list this year in Henrik Hegheim.
In one sentence only, because we're a bit short of time here, who is the best goalkeeper in Eliteserien?
I think Andreas Linde at Molde still just.
Fair enough. That makes up for you. I know you do like your goalkeepers, so that's Henrik Hegheim at Viking. Next on the list, you got a player at Vålerenga, and you're predicting him to be good on the pitch, and you're also predicting them to have a player who could be a bit of a gem.
Sakarius Opsal. He's back from a good loan spell at Tromsø last year. 29 appearances in the Obos again. He weighed in with a few goals and some assists as well. And I think he's been getting minutes in pre-season. And I hope he continues to get minutes because he's now 21-year-old. He's always been kind of touted as a good prospect. And I feel like with a whole year of football under his belt, he's ready. He's ready more. And he's at a good club. He's at a good team, surrounded by some top players. And there's a few midfielders at Vålerenga, like Thiago Holm and Felix Meira, Sahawi in a different type of midfielder. They've even got a youngster, Matthias Emilsen. But I think Opsal is definitely potentially one to. I'm not as confident about this one, to be honest, Jonathan. I've got a feeling he probably won't get enough minutes, but I just wonder what he's got in his tank now after a whole year of football under his belt. So, I hope he can develop.
Yeah, and if he doesn't get enough minutes, Osam Sarawi and Odin Thiago Holm are certainly two players as well that could potentially rack up a lot of minutes as well, aren't they? So a lot of players to watch at Vålerenga, which is an interesting thing, interesting development, because they in the dial years weren't that probably so exciting to watch, were they? But it's good to see. And finally on your list, the spotlight on Stabaek. You've got a right back here, 20 years old. Who is he?
Sturla Otterson. He caught my eye at the back end of last year. I think he could be one of these another one of these young talents that Stabaek seem to breed and develop, and I think he's got good pace as you expect of most fullbacks, but just someone I think the thing at Stabaek, right? Players can move upwards and develop very, very quickly. Sometimes it's like in the space of just a few weeks or a few months. You often feel like, where have you come from? Where did he come from like this suddenly? And I just wonder if Otterson could be one of them lads it could go the other way as well, but he's set to be starting for them there in that spot at right back. He can, I think, play left back as well. Just one that caught my eye back in the last season, and I wanted to get a Stabaek player in this tent to watch. So Otterson fits the bill.
Fantastic stuff, Steve. Congratulations, you made it to the end of this Norway Eliteserien season preview 2021 on the Nordic Football Podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it, Steve, as well. You've earned a good rest. So well done for your detailed research and appraisals. So yeah, let's see how the league goes. Let's see how 10 to watch go. And you can catch us on Twitter at Nordic Football. If you support any of the teams or if you've got any comments on the podcast, do let us know your thoughts. We're also on patreon.com/Nordic Football Podcast if you want to buy Steve a coffee or maybe a vegan sandwich for his exploits this season with that preview show. Very, very good. And we have had a few bonus episodes in recent weeks. Just to quickly touch on that. We'll see how we go with that in terms of how we divide it between Norway and Sweden. But certainly, I think we'll still provide some tips and that kind of thing on the bonus show on Patreon. So do tune in if you enjoy it. We've had some good feedback from our Patreons as well. So thanks a lot for that. Steve, where can people find you if they want to tweet you abuse for predicting their team being less, lower down the table than they expect?
At Meatman Soccer, that's where you can tweet at me.
At Meatman Soccer. You can find me on Twitter at JFFootball, JFFUTBOL. We're not covering Sweden this week because we've given you some solid content to get your teeth into on this episode, I think, in Norway. So for your first game of the season this weekend, it's going to be very, very exciting. Molde Tromsø, maybe one of the bigger games. Bodø Glimt Tromsø, one of the bigger games, the big derby up north. And we will be back with, obviously, as we always do, more content, more interviews, more features, plenty in both Sweden and Norway as the weeks come and go ahead. So, yeah, thanks a lot, Steve. You've done very well there.
Appreciate your time, everyone. If you've listening right to the end of this, then really, really do appreciate your time. But take care, everyone. Stay safe. Hope you enjoyed it. And, leave your feedback. Anything is welcome. Take care.
Thanks very much, guys. See you next week.